Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where the air smells faintly of sweat or pipe smoke, and something metallic you can't quite place. It's the year 1732 and you're sitting in what passes for a waiting room in a small colonial American town, though it's more like someone's parlor stuffed with nervous people and one extremely creaky wooden bench. A cat walks past with half an ear missing. Someone sneezes, and three heads whip around in suspicion. You've got a toothache, a fever, and a gnawing fear you're about to leave this place with fewer limbs than you walked in with. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and your local time. I'm always curious how far this sleepy little show travels. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're already regretting your decision. The doctor, if we're using that word generously, runs this place out of the front room of his house. No signs, no hours, just word of mouth and whoever's brave enough to knock. His name is Dr. Abel Fitch, and he's known for three things: his aggressive use of bleeding bowls, his terrible aim with a saw, and the fact that he once survived smallpox by accident. You're not alone here. Next to you is a burly man with what might be a pitchfork wound through his thigh. Across the room, a woman cradles a coughing child whose face is bright red with fever, and sitting in the corner, sharpening a knife against his boot, is Dr. Fitch himself, humming a hymn and sipping from a mug that smells suspiciously like rum. This is your healer. No one really speaks. There's no receptionist, no soothing music, just the soft ticking of a grandfather clock, the distant clang of a horseshoe being hammered outside, and the occasional groan from a back room where someone is probably regretting their last medical decision. You're trying not to panic, but you've heard stories. Last week, the blacksmith's wife came in with a cough and left with vapors, which just means no one really knew what was wrong. So they gave her a pipe to smoke and told her to stay indoors until the moon changed. The week before that, a boy had a splinter so infected it took two grown men to hold him down while Fitch poked at it with a red-hot iron. Medical licensing isn't really a thing yet. If you own a few tools and a book in Latin you can't read, you can pretty much call yourself a doctor. Dr. Fitch happens to also cut hair and pull teeth, so you can get your molars yanked and your wig powdered in the same visit. Very efficient. You shift on the bench. A rusty smell wafts from the corner, maybe dried blood, maybe something worse. You're not sure if your headache is from your actual illness or from the sheer stress of what you're about to endure. A woman across the room whispers a prayer under her breath. She's holding a poultice of some kind, mustard seeds and crushed herbs, pressed into a rag. The room believes in those more than in anything Fitch might do. A knock at the door. In comes a boy, maybe 10 years old, covered in soot and holding his wrist at a weird angle. He fell off the roof. Someone explains. Fitch grunts, stands, and leads the boy to the back without a word. The door swings shut, and seconds later, a sharp yelp echoes through the wall. The woman beside you winces. The child doesn't return. You start to wonder if it's too late to leave. But then Fitch's assistant, a teenager with ink-stained fingers and an expression of permanent horror, calls your name. You follow him past a dusty curtain into the inner sanctum. It smells worse in here. There's a wooden table, stained and splintered. A row of tools lines the wall. Saws, knives, hooks, and something that looks like it belongs on a fishing boat. A bowl sits under the table, half filled with a dark liquid you don't dare identify. "Sit," Fitch says, not looking up from his notebook. He's drawing something, a diagram of a human body, badly misshapen. "What's the trouble? You mentioned the fever, the headache, the sore throat." He nods. then opens a cabinet and pulls out a small jar of thick green paste. "Open," he says. You hesitate. "Open or get out." He shrugs. You open. The paste tastes like moldy garlic and despair. He nods. Satisfied? That's wormwood and vinegar. Kicks the fever right in the backside. You hope that's a metaphor. Fitch begins his examination. He feels your neck, sniffs once, and then sticks a thumb in your mouth to check your tongue. No gloves, of course. His hands smell like pipe smoke and pickles. "Liver's lazy," he mutters. "We'll fix that." He reaches for a lancet. That's a tiny blade used for bloodletting. And Fitch believes in bloodletting the way some people believe in gravity. With a flick, he slices a shallow cut near your elbow and holds a small ceramic bowl under it. "You've got bad humors," he says. "Gotta let 'em out. Too much black bile in your system. Makes the blood sluggish." Historians still argue whether colonial doctors truly believed in balancing humors or just liked watching people bleed. Either way, Fitch is committed. The bowl fills slowly. You feel woozy. He seems thrilled. As you sit there, pale and dripping, Fitch tells you about a curious case he had last week. A woman with twitching limbs. He gave her a boiled rabbit's foot and 2 ounces of mercury. She's better now. He grins. Or quieter. Anyway, you're starting to see double. He wraps your arm in a linen strip that might once have been a curtain. "Drink this," he says, handing you a cup. The liquid is thick and cloudy, with bits of leaf floating in it. "What is it?" you ask, against your better judgment. "Spirits and willow bark," he replies. "You'll sleep like a horse." That feels anatomically questionable, but you're too tired to argue. You drink. By the time you leave, you're staggering. The room tilts. Fitch waves cheerfully behind you, lighting his pipe with a taper that nearly sets the curtain ablaze. No one else in the waiting room makes eye contact as you pass. You survived your visit to the doctor. For now. The next morning, your arm's wrapped in a crusty bandage. Your fever's worse, and you're starting to suspect that "sleep like a horse" may have referred to the part where the horse gets shot behind the barn. Still, the town's small, and you're curious, or maybe just morbidly fascinated. You shuffle your aching limbs back to Dr. Fitch's office, not because you want more of whatever swamp potion he gave you yesterday, but because today's the day he does what he calls public procedures. You've heard whispers, tooth pulling, cyst lancing, maybe even something involving fish hooks and an infected thumb. You settle onto the splintery bench again. Across from you, a woman dabs her face with a lavender-soaked rag. Her eyes are wide, and her cheeks flushed. But that might be nerves more than illness. A man cradles a broken toe wrapped in bacon. You want to ask if it helps. But honestly, you're scared of the answer. Fitch bursts through the curtain, whistling a dirge. Today, he wears an apron that looks like it was once white and now just exists somewhere in the burgundy to brown range. A tuft of hair pokes out from under his tri-corner hat, and a pair of forceps dangles from his belt like he's cosplaying as Death's handyman. "Right," he says, cracking his knuckles. "Who's first?" No one volunteers. He picks at random. The chosen one is a man with a jaw like a boulder and the terrified eyes of someone who once tried to file his own molar. Fitch nods and beckons him forward. Here's something they don't tell you in school. Most 1700s doctors were also barbers. You didn't just get a haircut. You got your abscess drained and your toenail pulled at the same time. That red and white barber pole, it represents blood and bandages. Cheery, right. Fitch isn't just your town's physician. He's also the dentist, surgeon, and occasional coroner. And yes, he'll trim your beard if you ask nicely. In fact, the sign out front, currently hanging by one nail, reads, "Dr. A. Fitch, bleeder tooth yanker, barber, and gentle corrections of the skull. You watch as Fitch pries open the man's mouth. The molar in question is a jagged, blackened stump. Fitch pokes it once, and the man howls. Ah, yes. Fitch nods. Rotten to the root. We'll just coax it out. By coax, he means wrench. He grabs his dental pelican, a cruel-looking instrument shaped like a medieval torture device, and wedges it against the offending tooth. There's a grunt, a crunch, and a sound that may haunt your dreams for years. The man slumps forward, blood and spit dribbling from his lip. Fitch tosses the tooth into a tin and slaps the man on the back like they've just finished building a barn together. You'll live, he says. Probably, as Fitch washes his hands in a basin that's just not doing its job anymore. You wonder how a guy like him even gets into this line of work. The answer? By declaring it, formal medical education is rare. If you're rich, you might sail to Edinburgh or London and come back with a degree and a snobby accent. If not, you apprentice under someone slightly less dangerous than yourself and hope you don't kill too many people before getting the hang of it. Fitch? He claims to have studied under a surgeon in Boston for 6 months. Others say he was once a butcher who got curious. Historians still argue whether most colonial doctors were genuine professionals or just really confident hobbyists. Either way, Fitch is now preparing for his next trick, bloodletting on a man who insists he's been cursed by a passing gypsy. Yes, really. Out comes the brass bleeding bowl, polished to a dull shine. Fitch straps a tourniquet around the man's arm and pokes at his veins with a practiced squint. The lancet flashes, blood arcs. It's more theatrical than effective, but the man relaxes visibly as he bleeds. Placebo is powerful, especially when you don't know what a germ is. You're not sure if Fitch truly believes in balancing humors or if it's just a good excuse to keep using his sharp toys. He mumbles about excess bile and melancholic influence as he dabs the wound with wine-soaked gauze. Meanwhile, you try not to pass out again. There's no concept of sterile technique. Tools are wiped on aprons, reused between patients, and occasionally heated over a candle if someone gets fancy. You catch a glimpse of a saw that still has something fuzzy on its teeth. You look away. Later, Fitch sits beside you with a cup of cider, for him, not you, and begins waxing poetic about his favorite operations. Once drained 16 ounces of pus from a man's thigh, he says fondly. Smelled like old cheese and the devil's breath, he laughs. You smile weakly and pretend your stomach isn't a tempting mutiny. To be fair, Fitch does care. In his own horrifying way, he believes in what he does, even if half of it is guesswork and the other half is based on theories from ancient Greece. He's the town's lifeline, for better or much, much worse. And he's not alone. All over colonial America, men like him are chopping, bleeding, poulticing, and praying their way through medical crises. Some improve with experience. Others are chased out of town when the body count gets too high. The sun dips lower. Fitch sets down his tools, stretches his back, and lights his pipe. He glances at you. "You still sick?" he asks, not unkindly. You nod. "Well, rest, drink water, and if you start seeing colors that don't exist, come back. Could be your spleen." You have no idea what that means, but you thank him anyway and shuffle out, just ahead of the man with the bacon-wrapped toe. Back on the street, the wind smells like wood smoke and whatever disaster the tavern's serving for dinner. You feel queasy, exhausted, and, weirdly, a little grateful. You're not cured, but you're still breathing, which, in the 1700s, counts as a medical miracle. By the third day, you're no longer convinced you even needed a doctor. Whatever you caught may have started as a minor cold or a rebellious turnip. But now, thanks to Fitch's charming blend of bleeding, forced naps, and the taste of battery acid, Your body is waging a new war entirely. Your skin feels like paper, your stomach's considering secession, and your head pulses to the beat of your own mortality. But there's another reason you return. Today is Leech Day. You've heard the rumors that Fitch keeps them in a jar near the fire, that they wiggle with anticipation when someone walks in coughing. That once they slithered out of their jar and were found crawling toward a baby's crib like something from a folk horror play. You assume people exaggerate. They do not. You arrive early. Inside the office, Fitch is boiling a rag in something that smells like moldy rosemary. Beside him, a glass jar jiggles faintly. You squint. Inside, a dozen or so thick, shiny leeches undulate in slow motion, as if bored but also scheming. Ah, Fitch grins. Seeing you. Perfect timing. You're the right kind of pale. You weren't aware there was a right kind. He gestures to the chair near the hearth. It creaks ominously as you lower yourself in. You eye the jar. So, leeches? He nods proudly. Hirudo medicinalis. Imported. These are the best kind. European, hungry little chaps. You want to leave. Every part of your body, including the newly fainting parts, agrees. But Fitch is already rolling up your sleeve. Still feverish. Still weak. Clearly, your bad humors are resisting our efforts. This'll get things moving. And by moving, he means slurped out by vampire worms. Fitch opens the jar, plucks one out with his bare fingers, and slaps it onto your forearm. It wriggles for a moment, unsure of the lighting situation. Then it latches on. The sensation is not what you expect. There's no sharp pain, just a soft, cold pressure, like being kissed by something that hates you. He adds 2 more, one on your shoulder, one right below your collarbone. They numb the skin as they feed. Fitch says cheerfully. That's nature's little courtesy. You try not to gag. Leech therapy's been around for centuries. Ancient Egyptians used them. Medieval surgeons loved them. By the 1700s, they're practically a medical fashion trend. Got swelling? Leeches? Headache? Leeches? Gout? Toothache? Melancholy? Unruly children? Leeches? They're the medical equivalent of duct tape. Once drained a drunk who fell into the river, Fitch muses, watching your arm. Put a dozen of these on his belly. Leech got so full, it popped right off. Looks smug about it, too. You are now 3% more leech than person. The woman from earlier enters, holding her baby. The child is flushed, fussy. Fitch glances at them and nods. 1 moment, he tells her, before returning his attention to your little horror show. The first leech detaches. Its body is bloated, thick as a thumb, wriggling with satisfaction. You feel vaguely betrayed. Fitch gently removes it with a pinch of salt. That's the trick. Sprinkle salt or vinegar and they let go. Of course, they also thrash wildly, possibly curse you in worm language, and then lie there sulking in a tin tray. The next leech falls off naturally, its face stained dark with your blood. It looks smug. Maybe you imagined that. You're lightheaded now. Not from the blood loss. You've bled more from shaving with a dull razor, but from the sheer surrealism of it all. You, a thinking human, have just been partially drained by aquatic spaghetti. And it's not over. Fitch applies a cloth to your skin. You may keep bleeding, he says. Leech saliva's an anticoagulant. They're marvels of evolution. Don't worry if it seeps through your shirt later. Or tomorrow. Not exactly comforting. Historians still argue whether leech therapy was genuinely effective or just another fancy way to make a person lie still and shut up. But in the 1700s, they were medicine's little celebrities, imported, expensive, and occasionally even black market traded. Some doctors kept secret suppliers. Fitch probably just found his in a swamp. You stand, swaying slightly. Fitch hands you a strip of linen and a small glass bottle. Apply this to the bites if they itch. If one shows up in your chamber pot, don't panic. It happens. You do not want to know why. Outside, the sun is too bright. You squint against it, still feeling the phantom pressure of tiny mouths on your skin. The town looks the same. Carts rattle, dogs bark. Someone is loudly disputing the price of a cabbage, but you feel changed, marked, like someone who now knows what it's like to be part buffet. You wander to the tavern for a stiff drink or three. There, an old man at the bar notices your bandaged arm. "Fitch's leeches get you?" he asks. You nod. "Don't worry," he chuckles. He uses the clean ones on new folks. You freeze. He grins. "Kidding. Probably. Back home?" You examine the bite marks. Small red dots. Slightly puffy. Fitch's paste smells like mint and vinegar. You apply it anyway, hoping to ward off whatever bacterial curse those little vampires carried. As you lie in bed that night, you hear a faint squelch from your chamber pot. Just the wind, you tell yourself. You don't sleep. You wake up feeling like your veins are empty and your dignity has been lightly sautéed. Your arm itches where the leeches bit you. The bandage slipped off during the night, and now there's a small, sticky stain on your bedding. You stare at it, wondering if your great-grandchildren will look back on this moment as a medical milestone or a terrible, worm-related mistake. Fitch said you'd feel better today. He also once said he could remove a splinter with a pickaxe, so you're not exactly clinging to his medical assurances. But when you stand up, you don't fall over immediately, which you count as progress. Still, the fever lingers. Your throat feels raw, your stomach uncertain, and your tongue, surprise, metallic and dry. Naturally, the answer is to go back to Fitch, because in this town, your other option is to sit around and hope the spirits lose interest. You arrive just as he's pouring something thick and silver into a spoon. You think it's for a patient, but then he drinks it himself. He smacks his lips. "Ah, that's the stuff." You stare. "What was that?" "Calomel," he says proudly, wiping his mouth. "Mercury chloride. Clears the bowels, purges the bad, stimulates the liver. All in one miracle. Your stomach, already unstable, files a complaint. Mercury is everywhere in 18th century medicine. Doctors praise it as a stimulant, a purgative, and occasionally a cure for everything from constipation to heartbreak. They don't yet know that it's also poisoning them slowly and spectacularly. Fitch waves you over. You're still sluggish. Means your insides are clogged. Want to try a dose? You open your mouth to protest, but the spoon is already on its way in. He tips it past your lips before you can object. It tastes like tinfoil dipped in lightning. You gag. "Hold it," he says. "Don't spit it. You'll offend the spirits of alchemy. That's not a thing." But fine. Your body registers the intrusion almost immediately. Your stomach begins doing interpretive dance. Your intestines send a memo titled "Evacuate." You're sweating, maybe crying. Fitch hands you a small cloth. "It'll pass. Just wait." Mercury, it turns out, is a favorite tool of 1700s doctors. Not just for illnesses. They use it for syphilis, migraines, and yes, even melancholy. The idea is that the more violently your body reacts, the more effective the medicine. That's the logic. If it doesn't kill you, it's working. Historians still debate whether physicians genuinely believed in Mercury's powers, or just couldn't resist a treatment that made patients dramatically sick enough to seem convincing. Either way, Fitch seems delighted. "You'll be passing what's troubling you by tonight," he says, patting your shoulder. "Might even see colors." You don't want to see colors. You want soup. Instead, you end up curled on Fitch's spare cot with a bucket beside you and a view of the ceiling beams, which seem to be spinning slowly like you're in a very sad carousel. An hour later, Your bowels rebel in spectacular fashion. You make it to the chamber pot just in time. You consider naming it in appreciation. Fitch's assistant appears with a rag soaked in mint water. He wipes your face like you're some kind of fever-prone prince. You hate that this is now your life. As the mercury works its particular brand of toxic magic, you slip in and out of something that might be sleep or possibly just light organ failure. The ceiling watches. A spider crawls across a beam and seems to shake its head in pity. By evening, the worst has passed. You're empty. Hollow. Even. But weirdly. Slightly better. Like your body was a broken clock that just got kicked hard enough to tick again. You prop yourself up, blinking blearily. Fitch is grinding something in a mortar, humming a tune about the devil stealing socks. He glances over. Told you. Quickest route to wellness is through a thunderous purge. You mumble something that might be never again, but also might be, I miss soup. He smiles and slides you a small square of dried root. Chew this. Ginger helps with the shakes. You do. It burns, but it also steadies you. Around you. Fitch's office returns to life. Another patient arrives. An old woman complaining of chills. Fitch offers her the same silver spoon you drank from. She accepts without question. You watch her leave 20 minutes later, looking about as pale and doomed as you probably did. It's a system, not a good one, but it's consistent. As night falls, you thank Fitch. Why? You're not sure, and stumble out. Your legs are shaky, but they hold. The town is quiet. Lanterns flicker in windows. A dog barks once and is shushed by a tired voice. You make it home. You sleep. In the morning, you don't feel great, but you feel lighter, cleaner, like your body purged not just the illness but a few moral failings too. Still, you vow to avoid any more shiny spoons in the future. That's how they get you. You wake to church bells and the unsettling realization that you're still alive. That alone feels like a victory. Your stomach is hollowed out. Your mouth tastes like old pennies. But the fever has eased, not gone, just quieter, like it's sulking in another room. You shuffle outside for air, blinking at the morning light, and that's when you hear it, screaming, not the dramatic kind, not the short, startled kind. This is long, raw, animal, the kind that scrapes your nerves bare and keeps going. It's coming from Fitch's place. You freeze. Part of you knows exactly what this is. Another part pretends it might be a cat caught in a barrel. But the rhythm of it, the way it surges and breaks, tells you the truth. Someone is being cut open. You should walk away. Any reasonable person would. Instead, you follow the sound like your feet have developed their own terrible curiosity. Outside Fitch's house, a small crowd has gathered. No one speaks. They stand with hats clutched low, eyes fixed on the windows. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone else chews slowly on a piece of bread, because life is nothing if not poorly timed. A man beside you leans in. They're taking the leg, he whispers, like he's sharing gossip instead of trauma. The patient is a farmer named Josiah Reed. You know him vaguely. You've seen him at market, tall and quiet, missing 2 fingers from a plow accident years back. This time it was his leg. A wagon wheel crushed it. Bone broke the skin. Infection followed fast. In the 1700s, infection is a death sentence with a delay. Inside, Fitch is already working. You can't see much through the open door, but you don't need visuals. The sounds do all the explaining, the wet thud of movement, the scrape of metal. Josiah's voice, hoarse now, reduced to short, broken cries. There is no anesthesia, no ether, no morphine. At best, the patient gets whiskey, laudanum, or a stick to bite down on, Josiah got all three. You swallow hard. Amputation is common. Too common. It's often the only way to stop rot from creeping up a limb and into the body. Fitch knows this. Everyone does. What they don't know is why some wounds fester and others don't. They blame bad air, damp weather, moral weakness, sometimes even astrology. Historians still argue whether survival after amputation was mostly luck or whether experienced surgeons like Fitch actually improved outcomes through speed and decisiveness. What's certain is this: the faster the cut, the better the chance. And Fitch is fast. The screams peak, then collapse into wet sobbing. Someone inside shouts for more cloth. Another voice retches. You step back. Suddenly dizzy. The image in your mind is too sharp. You imagine the saw biting through flesh. Then bone. The resistance changing like cutting green wood. You imagine the smell. Sweet. Coppery. Unmistakable. A woman near you turns away, pressing her face into her shawl. My brother lost his arm last winter, she murmurs to no one. Lived 3 days. You don't know what to say, so you say nothing. After a while, the screaming stops. The door opens. Fitch's assistant emerges, pale and shaking, carrying a bucket you do not want to inspect. He dumps it behind the house and leans over, hands on his knees, breathing like he's just run a mile. Fitch follows, sleeves rolled up, apron soaked dark. He wipes his hands on a rag that immediately gives up. His face is calm, focused, not cruel, exactly. Professional. He'll live, Fitch announces. If the fever doesn't take him, the crowd exhales. A collective release of tension. Some nod. Some cross themselves. One man claps softly, then stops. Embarrassed. You feel strange about it. Relieved, yes, but also unsettled by how normal this feels. How routine. A man just lost his leg, and everyone is already mentally moving on. Later, you pass by Josiah's house. His wife sits on the steps, red-eyed but upright, holding a bowl of broth. Inside, you hear low moaning. It's not over. It never is. That night, sleep comes in fragments. Every time you drift off, you hear the scream again, stretched and warped. You wake sweaty, heart pounding, grateful for the dark. You think about Fitch, about his steady hands, about how easily he crossed the line between healer and butcher, not because he wanted to, but because someone had to. In the morning, you wake sore, weak, but alive. Somewhere in town, Josiah wakes without a leg. Somewhere else, someone else is getting hurt, and the saw waits, clean enough by Fitch's standards, hanging on the wall. You don't plan to see Josiah again, not right away. Your brain has filed the whole amputation scene into a locked drawer labeled "Absolutely Not," and every time it rattles, you shove it shut with a mental chair. But the town is small, the roads are fewer. And sickness, in this place, is basically the unofficial local currency. So when word spreads that Fitch is riding out for house calls and needs an extra set of hands, you end up volunteering in the dumb, familiar way humans do when they're curious and trying to prove they're not scared. You tell yourself you're doing it to learn. You tell yourself you're doing it to help. You tell yourself a lot of things. Fitch meets you at dawn with a satchel that clinks like a pirate's treasure chest, except it's full of glass vials and metal tools instead of gold. He's already in a good mood, which is alarming. He swings himself onto a horse that looks half asleep, ties the satchel to the saddle, and nods at you like you're late for work at the world's worst internship. 3 stops, he says. Maybe 4 if someone's dramatic. You follow on foot for the first stretch, then borrow a neighbor's mule that has the personality of a damp towel. The road out of town is a ribbon of packed dirt and ruts, bordered by bare winter trees and fences, leaning like tired men. The air bites your cheeks. You can taste wood smoke from distant chimneys. Fitch rides ahead, humming. Every so often he pats his satchel like it's a beloved pet. The first house is a low cabin with a roof patched in mismatched shingles. A woman meets you at the door, eyes wide, apron stained. "It's my husband," she says. "He can't breathe right. He's been wheezing all night." Fitch walks in like he owns the place. He always does. That's part of the job. Confidence so loud it drowns out uncertainty. Inside, the husband sits by the hearth, propped up on pillows. His face is slick with sweat. His breathing is shallow, whistling. A child sits nearby, silently twisting a piece of string, watching with the stillness of someone who has seen enough. Fitch kneels, listens to the man's chest by pressing his ear against the shirt. No stethoscope, just raw, intimate listening. He frowns. "Congestion," he declares. "Phlegm's lodged." He asks for hot water, vinegar, and a cloth. The wife scrambles. You stand there holding the satchel, feeling like a stagehand at a grim little theater. Fitch soaks the cloth, folds it, and places it over the man's face. "Breathe," he orders. The vinegar fumes hit you even from a step away. The man coughs, then coughs harder, the sound deep and wet. For a moment, it actually seems to help. The man's chest loosens. He hacks up something into a rag. Fitch nods like he just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. "There," he says. "Better out than in." Then he produces a small packet of powder and hands it to the wife. "Add this to his drink twice a day. If he worsens, bleed him." You don't ask what the powder is because you're not sure you want to know. But Fitch answers anyway, as if reading your face. "Ground licorice, a bit of opium, and dried toad." You blink. "Toad. Don't make that face." Fitch says, "Toad's been helping men longer than your opinions have." Quirky tidbit. Right there, alive and hopping, powdered toad, dried frog, bits of animal and mineral, all mashed into remedies because the world is still halfway between folklore and pharmacology. Some of it helps by accident. Some of it helps because people rest, hydrate, and stop working for a minute. And some of it helps by making them so distracted they forget they're sick. Historians still argue whether these household remedies were more effective than the doctor's interventions, or whether the doctor simply arrived at the moment many illnesses naturally turned a corner. You leave the cabin with the smell of vinegar in your nose. The wife thanks Fitch like he's delivered a miracle. Fitch tips his hat, already moving on. The second stop is a farmhouse farther out, where the problem is not breathing, but childbirth. The message reached town late. A boy ran it in, breathless, saying the midwife wanted help, not because she couldn't do her job, but because the baby had been stuck for hours and the mother was fading. The farmhouse is crowded, tense. Women move quietly, eyes flicking to Fitch and then away. You feel the temperature drop, not from the winter air, but from the social shift. This is women's work. Fitch is an outsider here, even as a doctor. A midwife meets him in the hallway, hands stained, hair pulled back tight. Her face is calm, but her eyes are sharp and tired. "Thank you for coming," she says, polite, controlled, not grateful. Fitch nods once. "How long?" "Since yesterday evening," she replies. "The baby's head isn't turning right." Fitch glances at you. "Wait here," he says. And for the first time, you're grateful to be told to do nothing. From the other room, you hear murmured instructions, then a long groan that rises and falls like a wave. You pace in the hallway, trying not to imagine too much. The air smells of sweat and boiling water and fear. A few minutes later, the midwife comes out and takes Fitch aside. You catch pieces, forceps, tearing. She's exhausted. Fitch's jaw tightens. Forceps are a controversial tool. Some see them as life-saving, Others see them as meddling metal claws that turn birth into a battlefield. In this era, the knowledge is uneven. Some doctors have skill, others have confidence without competence. Which is the most dangerous type? You don't go into the room, but you hear the clink of metal, a hush, then, suddenly, a sound you've never wanted to hear more in your life. A baby's cry, thin at first, then stronger. The hallway exhales. Someone sobs. The midwife opens the door just enough to let warm air spill out. Her expression doesn't soften much, but she nods once. "Both alive," she says. Fitch's shoulders drop slightly. He doesn't look triumphant. He looks relieved, almost human. He washes his hands at the basin, and for once you see him scrub longer than usual, as if the stakes demanded it. He says quietly, to no one, "Lucky turn. Not skill, not genius. A lucky turn. You ride on." The third stop is stranger. A man in a small cottage has what his wife calls night terrors. He wakes screaming, sees shadows, claims something sits on his chest. The neighbors have started whispering about possession. The minister wants prayer. The wife wants sleep. Fitch wants to be paid. Inside, the man sits rigid on a stool, eyes darting. His face is sunken. He looks like he hasn't rested in weeks. When Fitch approaches, the man flinches. Fitch doesn't mock him. That surprises you. He circles slowly, like he's studying an animal that might bolt. "You drink?" Fitch asks. The man nods. "Sometimes." "How much is sometimes?" Fitch presses. The man hesitates. The wife answers, "A lot." Fitch nods as if that's all he needed. "Your body's shaking off spirits," he says. And you realize he's not talking about ghosts. He's talking about alcohol, withdrawal, stress, exhaustion. The words don't exist in this town's medical language the way they do now. But the phenomenon does. Fitch takes it seriously in his own blunt way. He prescribes rest, thin ale instead of hard liquor, and an infusion of valerian root. Then, because this is the 1700s and no visit is complete without at least one questionable move, he suggests a small bleed to calm the blood. You watch the wife's face. She doesn't look convinced. She looks desperate. She agrees because desperation makes people say yes to almost anything. You hold the bowl while Fitch makes a small cut. The man winces but doesn't scream. His eyes soften afterward. Not with cure, but with fatigue. Sometimes fatigue looks like improvement. Outside, as you mount up again, Fitch glances at you. "You look like you've swallowed a sermon," he says. You manage a weak laugh. "You do this every day?" He shrugs. People get sick. People get hurt. People get weird ideas in their heads. Someone has to show up and act like it can be fixed. That's the job. Really. Show up. Act like you know. Try something. Hope the body does the rest. As you head back toward town, the sun hanging low and pale, you realize how wide Fitch's world is. Not just one office with leeches and spoons, but cabins and farmhouses, births and fevers and frightened minds. The ailments range from tragic to absurd, and the line between them is thinner than you'd like. At the edge of town, Fitch slows his horse and pats his satchel again. "Good day's work," he says. You glance down at your hands. They smell faintly of vinegar and blood and boiled herbs. You've helped, technically. You've witnessed, definitely. You've also learned that being a doctor here is less about certainty and more about showing up in the mud with a bag of sharp things and a straight face. You're not sure that's comforting, but you're still walking, still breathing, still here. In this century, that's enough. Back in town, you think you're done with surprises. You've watched a leg disappear. You've held a bleeding bowl like it's a serving dish at the world's grimmest banquet. You've stood outside a birthing room listening to metal clink and prayers tighten. Surely the universe has exhausted its supply of medical horrors. Then you hear the women talking. Not in the loud, public way men do. Not in the tavern. Not on the street corner. This is the low, threaded kind of conversation that happens over wash basins and bread dough, under the steady scrape of chores. It's the kind of talk that doesn't want ears, but always finds them. You're passing behind a house when you catch it. She's got the vapors again. One woman says, womb trouble. Another replies like she's commenting on the weather. Maybe hysteria. A third adds, and the word lands like a stone. Hysteria. A diagnosis that's less an illness and more a shrug with authority. A label that means she's upset in a way we don't like, and we'd rather call it sickness than listen. You keep walking, but the talk follows you like smoke. Later that afternoon, you end up back at Fitch's place, not because you need him, but because you've developed an unhealthy relationship with curiosity. His waiting room is full again. The bench groans under the weight of bodies and worry. A teenager with a swollen cheek presses a rag to his face. An older man scratches at a rash that looks like it's trying to become its own creature. And in the corner, a woman sits very still, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. She looks like she's trying not to exist. Fitch notices you, grunts a greeting, then leans close as if sharing a joke. That one, he murmurs, nodding toward the still woman, has a wandering womb. You blink. A what? A womb, he repeats, like you're the slow one. It drifts about in there, presses on organs, causes fits, sadness, strange thoughts. Women are complicated. He says it with the tone of a man explaining a stubborn hinge. This is the part where you want to argue. But you're in 1700s America, and arguing with the local doctor about female anatomy is like trying to teach a rooster algebra. It won't happen, and you'll probably get pecked for trying. The wandering womb idea isn't new. It's ancient, passed down from Greek medicine. The belief is that the uterus can roam around the body like a restless animal, causing suffocation, fainting, and emotional outbursts. Treatments are, predictably, weird. Some doctors try to lure it back into place with pleasant smells placed near the pelvis. Others try to chase it upward with foul odors near the nose. In the logic of the time, your uterus is basically a cat. It goes where it wants unless you tempt it with the right scent. Historians still argue whether colonial physicians truly believed the womb wandered or whether it was a convenient explanation for symptoms they didn't understand, especially when those symptoms came from women. Fitch calls the woman forward. Her name is Mercy Talbot. She moves slowly, as if her body is heavy and her mind is somewhere else. She doesn't look dramatic. She looks exhausted. Fitch asks a few questions, mostly about her appetite, her sleep, whether she's been keeping marital duties. Mercy's cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her eyes flick to the floor. You can feel the imbalance in the room like a tilted table. Her discomfort is treated as evidence. Her silence is treated as confirmation. Fitch presses 2 fingers to her wrist, counts, then nods like he's solved a puzzle. Your blood runs fast. Your nerves are stirred. We must calm you. He reaches for a bottle of laudanum, opium in alcohol. It's the era's answer to anxiety, pain, grief, and inconvenient feelings. He pours a small dose into a spoon and holds it out. Mercy hesitates. Take it, Fitch says, gentle but firm. She swallows. Her throat tightens. Her eyes water. Now, Fitch continues. Warm compresses, lavender. Keep away from strong emotions. No reading too late at night. And for the love of God, stop thinking so much. He says that last part like it's medical wisdom. You almost laugh, but nothing about Mercy is funny. Mercy sits again, hands trembling slightly. The laudanum will dull her edges, soften her into something easier for everyone else to live with. It won't solve whatever's actually happening in her body or her life. It will just make her quieter. Another woman comes in, older, with a stiff back and a clenched jaw. Fitch doesn't call her hysterical. He calls her stout and battling the rooms. He gives her a poultice and tells her to keep moving. Her pain is respected as physical. Mercy's pain is treated as a wandering organ and too many thoughts. You start to notice this pattern everywhere. A young wife complains of headaches and fatigue. Fitch asks if she's pregnant. When she says no, he suggests she should be. Childbearing settles the female constitution, he says, as if a baby is a pill you swallow. A widow comes in with stomach cramps. Fitch implies grief is rotting her insides. He recommends prayer and a tonic made from bitter herbs. She leaves looking smaller than when she entered. In the waiting room, the women trade remedies quietly among themselves. Raspberry leaf tea, chamomile, warm milk with honey. Midwife advice. There's a whole underground economy of care, passed hand to hand, often more sensible than anything Fitch prescribes. And yet, when things turn dangerous, they still come to him. Because he's the town's official authority, because men wrote the rules, because the tools and the titles sit in his house, not theirs. That evening, you're walking home when you see Mercy again. She's outside, standing near a fence, her gaze unfocused. The laudanum has softened her movements. She looks calm now, but not in a good way. More like she's been wrapped in cotton. You approach carefully. "Are you all right?" you ask. She blinks slowly, like waking from a dream. "He says my womb is wandering," she murmurs. You don't know what to say. There isn't a right thing. There's only the truth hovering unspoken. Maybe it's not her womb. Maybe it's her life. Maybe it's loneliness, depression, exhaustion, trauma, a body that's been asked to carry too much with too little rest. Maybe it's something treatable but not understood yet. Mercy's mouth twitches into a faint, bitter smile. "If it's wandering," she says softly, "I don't blame it. That lands in you like a quiet punch." You walk her to her gate. She steps inside, slow and careful, and you watch until she disappears into the dim interior of her house. A lantern flickers behind the window, then steadies. You keep walking, the night air cold and sharp. Somewhere in town, Fitch is cleaning his tools. Satisfied he has restored balance to Mercy Talbot's humors. Somewhere else, women are brewing tea, sharing advice, holding each other up in ways that never make it into his notebook. You look up at the dark sky and think about how much medicine here is shaped by power, not knowledge. How easily a woman's suffering becomes a story men tell about her body instead of a truth they listen to. And you realize you've been scared of saws and leeches and mercury spoons. But this is its own kind of harm. Quieter, polite, wrapped in authority. You head home with your hands in your pockets, wishing you could reach into the future and bring back the one cure that seems most absent here. Being believed. You start hearing names before you meet faces. Quiet ones. Ones spoken with a mix of respect and caution. Not doctor, not sir, but softer titles that sound like they belong to the land itself. The herb woman, the midwife, the root gatherer. Fitch calls them amateurs, charlatans, sometimes worse. He laughs when their names come up, the way a man laughs when he's a little threatened but doesn't want to admit it. Still, when his treatments fail, when the bleeding doesn't help and the mercury only makes things louder and messier, people drift elsewhere, quietly, politely, with baskets instead of appointments. You follow that drift one afternoon. It starts with a child, a girl no older than 8, her arm red and swollen from a bee sting that's turned ugly. Fitch bled her twice and gave her vinegar water. The swelling spread anyway. Her mother thanks him and leaves. But instead of going home, she turns down a narrow path at the edge of town. You follow at a distance, feeling like you're trespassing on something important. The path winds into trees, where the air smells damp and green even in colder months. After a short walk, you see a small cabin, low and wide, with bundles of dried plants hanging from the eaves. Smoke curls gently from the chimney. This place feels different, quieter, not sterile, not sharp. Lived in. The woman who answers the door is older, but strong. Her hair is streaked with gray and pulled back tight. Her eyes miss nothing. "You're not sick," she says, looking at you. Not unkindly, just observant. "I'm curious." You reply. She considers you for a moment, then steps aside. "Don't touch anything," she says, "and don't repeat names." Inside, the cabin is warm. Shelves line the walls, packed with jars and bundles. Roots, leaves, bark. Things Fitch would call superstition, but which smell like earth and care and time. The girl sits on a stool while the woman examines her arm gently, pressing, asking questions in a low voice. Not just about the sting, but about what the child ate, how she slept, whether she's been scared lately. This is medicine without hurry. The woman mixes a paste from crushed plantain leaves and honey, applies it to the swelling, then wraps it cleanly. No bleeding, no lectures, no fear. "She'll be better by morning," she says. "If not, come back." The mother's shoulders drop like she's been holding them up for days. Midwives and herbalists like this one have always been here. Long before men with saws and Latin books arrived, they learned by watching bodies, seasons, outcomes. What eases pain, what makes it worse, what actually helps. They don't get paid in coins so much as bread, cloth, eggs, loyalty. Historians still argue how much early American medicine owed to these women, and how much was deliberately erased when formal medical institutions began to form. What's clear is that many effective remedies were dismissed simply because of who practiced them. You notice how often women come here quietly, without fanfare. You notice how many things get better without bleeding. Later, you speak with a midwife you recognize from the farmhouse. She's washing herbs in a basin behind her home, sleeves rolled, movements practiced. "Fitch means well," she says when you mention him, "but he treats birth like battle. Sometimes the body just needs time and patience." She tells you about techniques passed from mother to daughter, about knowing when not to intervene, about listening more than acting. "Men like tools," she says. Not unkindly. They like doing. We learn watching. It's not that these healers know everything. Some remedies are useless, some dangerous, but the difference is humility. When something doesn't work, they stop, they adapt, they share knowledge instead of guarding it. Back in town, Fitch scoffs when you mention the herbalist. "She'll get someone killed one day," he mutters, sharpening a blade. Maybe. Or maybe she already saved dozens without anyone writing it down. That night, you think about how medicine isn't one story here. It's many, overlapping, competing, official and unofficial, loud and quiet, written and remembered. You think about how the future will crown winners and call them pioneers, while forgetting the hands that steadied the bodies when no one was watching. As you drift toward sleep, the scent of crushed leaves lingers in your mind, calm and grounding. Not everything that heals leaves a scar. You don't realize how fragile the town's calm is until it snaps. It starts with a rumor, which is how everything starts here. A traveler arrives from a coastal port, pale and sweating, with a rash that looks like spilled ink. He claims it's nothing, just a heat fever. He stays at the tavern anyway. Because of course he does. And by the next morning, the tavern keeper is coughing so hard he can't stand upright. 2 days later, a child breaks out in spots. 3 days after that, someone says the word that makes every stomach drop. Smallpox. It doesn't matter if they're right yet. The mere possibility is enough to turn the whole town into a flock of startled birds, scattering in every direction at once. You feel it in the air first. The way people stop lingering in doorways. The way conversations end abruptly when someone approaches. The way mothers drag children closer as if proximity alone is a shield. By afternoon, Fitch is moving faster than usual, and that alone is unsettling. He doesn't hum. He doesn't joke. He doesn't sip rum like it's part of his medical oath. He's gone tight around the eyes. The pox is in the region. He tells the waiting room, voice flat. If you've got fever and spots, you stay home. If you've been near someone with fever and spots, you stay farther home. Someone asks, is it truly the pox? Fitch doesn't answer right away, and the silence answers for him. Smallpox isn't just an illness. It's a story everyone knows, a nightmare with familiar steps. Fever, aches, then the rash. Spots that swell, fill, crust. Some survive, some don't. And those who do often carry the marks forever. In this century, your skin can become a record of what you lived through. You remember Fitch saying he survived smallpox by accident. At the time, it sounded like a brag. Now it sounds like a warning. That evening, the town council meets in the meeting house. Men in heavy coats, faces tight, voices clipped. The minister is there, of course, ready to frame the outbreak as divine displeasure. The tavern keeper's wife is there too, pale and furious, because she knows exactly where this started. They debate quarantine, closing the tavern, stopping the market, posting watchers at the road. And then, like oil on fire, someone mentions Salem from decades back and mutters about curses and sin and strangers bringing ruin. Fear doesn't just make people cautious, it makes them stupid. Historians still argue whether colonial communities handled outbreaks with practical wisdom, or whether panic consistently overrode reason. You can feel both instincts wrestling in this room. Outside, the streets are quieter than you've ever seen. Lanterns seem dimmer. Dogs bark less, as if they've also heard the word smallpox and decided to behave. The next day, you see your first clear case. A boy, maybe 12, sits on his porch wrapped in a blanket. His face is flushed. His eyes look too bright. And on his forehead, just beneath the hairline, a cluster of small red spots has appeared like the beginning of a map. His mother stands behind him, arms folded tight across her chest, jaw clenched so hard it trembles. Fitch approaches slowly, keeping distance. He doesn't touch the boy. He squints. He asks questions. The boy's voice is thin. How long the fever? 2 days, the mother says. Any vomiting? A little. Fitch nods. Grim. He steps back. Keep him isolated, he says. No visitors. Boil cloth. Burn what you can't boil. Burn what you can't boil. Your mind snags on that. The casualness of it. The idea that objects, like people, can carry death. The mother's eyes fill. Will he die? Fitch doesn't lie. He might, he says softly, but he might not. That's the truth and the cruelty of it. Smallpox is a coin toss with a loaded weight, and no one knows which way it will land. By the end of the week, there are more porches like that, more blankets, more spots, more whispered prayers. The town begins to split into those who pretend it isn't happening and those who lock their doors so hard the wood groans. A stranger rides through and someone throws a rock at him just for being unfamiliar. That's how fear works. It looks for a body to blame. Fitch's office changes too. The waiting room empties, not because people are healthier, but because they're terrified to sit near each other. Those who come are desperate. Those who stay away are praying. Fitch starts making rounds again, but now he carries something different in his satchel. Not leeches, not mercury, cloth masks. Sometimes, tied over the mouth and nose, vinegar-soaked rags. A bundle of herbs meant to purify the air. Miasma theory rules this era, the belief that bad air causes disease. The town responds by fumigating rooms, burning pitch, carrying posies. Some of it might help by accident, because smoke keeps people apart and vinegar discourages lingering. But it isn't a magic shield. You watch women hang sheets outside homes as warnings. You watch fathers dig hurried pits behind barns in case they need them. You watch the minister preach that God is testing the faithful, while people quietly wonder if God is just angry. One night, you hear the bell, not the church bell, not the Sunday bell, the death bell. A slower toll, measured, heavy. It rings once, twice, 3 times. Someone has lost the toss. The next morning, the dead are not displayed in the usual way. No long wake, no crowded room. The body is wrapped quickly, taken quietly. Neighbors stand at a distance, hats lowered, eyes averted like looking directly might invite the same fate. You realize, with a cold clarity, that this isn't just disease, it's social collapse in miniature. Each fever is a crack in the town's trust. Each rash makes people suspicious. Each cough turns a friend into a threat. And yet, you also see small acts of stubborn care. A woman leaves bread on a doorstep and walks away without knocking. A boy ties a note to a fence. We are still here. Someone sweeps the church steps even though no one is attending. Humans can be ridiculous in panic, but they can also be quietly brave. As you move through the days, you feel the town's rhythm change. The market quiets. The tavern closes. Roads empty. You hear fewer laughs and more prayers. You stop shaking hands. You avoid crowds. You watch your own body obsessively, waiting for spots that aren't there yet. At night, you lie awake listening for coughing in the dark like it's thunder in the distance. And somewhere, in the middle of all this, Fitch sits at his table, writing notes by candlelight, trying to contain a nightmare with the tools of his century. The pox has arrived, and now everyone is counting days. The town doesn't just fear smallpox. It argues with it. Once the spots appear, once the first death bell tolls, the community splits into camps almost overnight. Not along neat lines like rich and poor, but along a more chaotic boundary. Who believes you should do something, and who believes doing something is exactly how you make God angrier. You see it in the meeting house, where the air is packed with wet wool, candle smoke, and panic. Men sit shoulder to shoulder but lean away from each other like magnets flipped the wrong way. Someone coughs and half the room flinches. Fitch stands at the front with his hands clasped, face hard. He looks tired. Not the usual, I stayed up drinking rum and reading Latin. Tired. This is heavier. This is a man trying to hold back a flood with his sleeves rolled up. We can inoculate, he says. The word lands like a thrown stone. A murmur runs through the room. Some people nod, desperate. Others recoil as if he suggested feeding children to wolves. Inoculation is the controversial new thing, the whispered practice from overseas that's been trickling into the colonies. Not vaccination yet, not cowpox, not the later miracle people will eventually romanticize. This is variolation, taking material from a smallpox sore and introducing it to a healthy person, usually through a small cut or scratch, hoping to produce a milder infection that grants protection. It sounds insane because it is a little insane. You are literally giving someone smallpox on purpose. But the idea isn't pulled from nowhere. It's been practiced in parts of Africa, the Ottoman Empire, and Asia long before the English-speaking world decides to argue about it. In the colonies, It became notorious during the Boston smallpox epidemic when prominent figures publicly fought over it, sermons flying like arrows and newspapers dripping with outrage. Now, the argument has arrived in your town. A man in the front row stands up so fast his bench scrapes. "You'll spread it," he shouts. "You'll bring the pox into houses that might have been spared." Fitch doesn't flinch. "It's already here," he says. "It's spreading whether we bless it or not." The minister rises next, slow and theatrical. "To take sickness into your body by choice," he says, voice echoing off the wooden walls, "is to test providence. God gives illness as a trial and a warning. You do not invite the warning inside your own flesh." Someone mutters, "Amen." Someone else mutters something much less holy. Fitch's jaw tightens. "God also gave you brains," he says, and you can feel half the room stiffen at the audacity. You glance around and see the faces that want action. Mothers whose children are already coughing. Fathers whose farms will fail if they lose their hands to fever. People who don't have the luxury of philosophical debate because they're staring down the barrel of death. Then you see the faces that fear inoculation more than the disease itself. Because inoculation is a choice, and a choice means blame. If a child dies of natural smallpox, it's tragedy. If a child dies after inoculation, it's your fault. And the town will remember forever. Historians still argue whether early inoculation's biggest obstacle was medical risk or moral outrage. But standing here, you can feel it. The outrage is its own disease. Outside the meeting house, the arguments continue in smaller clusters. You overhear an older woman hiss. "They'll cut the pox into our babes like carving meat," another man replies. "Better that than a grave." Someone suggests Fitch is doing it for money. Someone else says the British do it and therefore it must be evil. A teenager says he heard you can turn into a cow if you take foreign disease into your blood, and you briefly consider walking into the river. Finally, the council agrees to allow a trial. Not official support, just permission. They pick a few volunteers, mostly families already exposed, and isolate them at the edge of town in a small outbuilding, a crude inoculation house, a place where hope and terror will sit together in one room. You go with Fitch the next morning, because at this point, your curiosity has fully replaced your survival instincts. The outbuilding smells of straw and vinegar. Families stand close, clutching each other like knots. A mother holds her toddler so tightly the child's cheeks squish. A father stares at the floor, lips moving in silent prayer. Fitch's assistant sets out clean cloths as if cleanliness is a spell. Fitch opens his satchel and removes a small box. Inside is a tiny bit of dried smallpox material, collected from someone currently ill. Just looking at it makes your skin crawl. He selects the first volunteer, a boy about 9, freckles bright against pale skin. The boy tries to act brave. His lower lip betrays him. Fitch speaks gently, which is rare for him. "This will sting," he says. "Then you'll feel unwell a few days. But it may keep you from dying." The boy nods, eyes shining. Fitch scratches the boy's arm with a lancet, just enough to break skin. Then he rubs the smallpox material into the cut. It's quiet in the room, so quiet you can hear straw settling. The mother's breath catches. The boy's face twists, but he doesn't cry. Fitch wraps the arm and pats his shoulder. "One down," he murmurs. The next volunteer is a young woman, newly married, cheeks flushed with fear. The minister is not here. The councilmen are not here. They gave permission and then stayed safely away, which tells you everything about bravery and politics. Fitch inoculates her, too. Then another child. Then an older man who insists he'd rather take his chances with controlled sickness than wait for uncontrolled death. As Fitch works, you notice something unsettling. The act itself is small. A scratch, a smear, a rap. For all the shouting in the meeting house, it's a quiet, almost delicate procedure. That's what makes it feel so strange. Something with enormous stakes done with a movement barely larger than swatting a fly. Afterward, Fitch gives instructions. No visitors, he says. Boil cloth. Keep them warm. Watch for fever. If the rash is heavy, send for me. If it's light, thank whatever you believe in. The families nod, clutching the instructions like talismans. Back in town, word spreads fast, faster than the pox. Somehow. Some people call Fitch a hero. Others call him a monster. The minister preaches hard against man-made plague. A few men swear they'll burn the inoculation house down. That night, you see one of them, drunk outside the tavern, slurring. Fitch is cutting Satan into children. His friend laughs too loudly, like laughter will keep fear from biting his throat. You go home uneasy. You think about that scratch on the boy's arm, about the way the mother's hands shook, about the gamble they just took in a world with so few good options. Over the next week, you visit the outbuilding from a distance. You don't go close, but you watch. You see smoke from their chimney. You see Fitch riding out, face tight, returning late. You hear that some of the inoculated have fevers. That one has a rash, that another is doing well. The town waits like it's holding its breath underwater. Then, one afternoon, the mother of the freckled boy comes into town, walking carefully, like she's afraid her footsteps might jinx something. She stops outside the meeting house where a cluster of men are talking, and she lifts her chin. "He's fine," she says, voice shaking but proud. "He was sick for 3 days. Mild spots. Now he's eating again." A ripple moves through the crowd. Hope, cautious and thin, but real. Not everyone is convinced. Someone mutters, "Wait a month." Someone else says, "It could still kill him." And that's true. Nothing is guaranteed. But for the first time since the first death bell, the town hears a story that isn't just dread. You look toward Fitch's house and imagine him inside, writing notes by candlelight, tracking fevers and rashes like he's trying to map the storm. You imagine him listening to the minister's sermons and the townsmen's threats, and still showing up at the outbuilding with his lancet and his grim determination. Historians still argue how much inoculation changed outcomes in the colonies versus how much it changed attitudes. But you can feel the shift already. The town has tasted the idea that disease isn't purely fate. That maybe, just maybe, you can push back. The pox is still here. People are still sick. Fear still stalks the streets. But now there's a new argument in the air, sharper than vinegar smoke. What if you don't just endure? What if you intervene? The thing about smallpox panic is that it turns every child into a fragile prophecy. You look at a kid playing in the dirt and your mind immediately flashes forward to blankets, spots, and a bell tolling slow. Parents start doing math with their hearts. Who has been near whom? Who touched which door handle? Who shared a cup? Who sneezed in the general direction of anyone under 12? And because adults are adults, they cope by doing what they always do when they're terrified. They experiment on their kids, not out of cruelty, most of the time, out of desperation, superstition, and the kind of frantic love that says, if I do something, anything, I might stop the worst from happening. The problem is, something in this century is often a recipe that sounds like it was invented during a dare. You see it everywhere now. A mother in the lane has her son chewing raw garlic until his eyes water. Keeps the pox away, she insists. The way people insist on things when they cannot bear uncertainty. Another family hangs a pouch of dried herbs around their toddler's neck like a charm. Rosemary, rue, maybe a little bit of something that smells like a barn. The toddler gnaws on it thoughtfully, because toddlers will eat anything, including fate. In one house, you find a boy sitting beside the hearth with his feet submerged in a bucket of warm beer. His father explains, earnestly. That the yeast draws out sickness. The boy looks up at you with the resigned expression of someone who has already lived a full, exhausting life at age 9. And then there's Fitch. Despite the controversy, he's become busier than ever. Parents who shouted about Providence last week are now knocking quietly at his door, hat in hand, asking if he can just look at the child for a moment. Fear makes hypocrites of almost everyone. You arrive one morning to find the waiting room full of children. That alone is eerie. Kids are usually loud, restless, sticky. These are quiet, clutching their mother's skirts, watching the tools on the wall with wide, old eyes. A girl sits on the bench with a cloth pressed to her forehead. Her face is pale and damp, lips cracked. Her mother fans her with a folded paper, whispering prayers between breaths. Across from them, a boy's neck is dotted with tiny red bumps that might be the start of something or might be nothing. In this town, might be nothing no longer exists. Fitch's assistant moves among them like a haunted ghost, handing out cups of thin broth. Fitch himself emerges, sleeves rolled, eyes bloodshot. He looks like he's been living on vinegar fumes and spite. He points at the boy with the bumps. "You," he says. Back room. The mother stands so fast her knees knock the bench. "Is it the pox?" she asks. Fitch pauses, just long enough to feel heavy. "Could be chicken pox," he says finally. "Could be fleas. Could be the beginning. We watch. Watch. That's the cruelest instruction. It means wait while your mind invents funerals." Inside the back room, Fitch examines the boy under the light of a small window. He presses gently on a bump, then sniffs, because of course he does. He asks if the boy has fever. The mother says yes. "A little." Fitch nods and pulls out something you recognize with dread. A spoon. Not the shiny mercury spoon from your own recent trauma, but a spoon of bitter tonic. He pours a dark liquid from a bottle and offers it. "What is it?" the mother asks. "Jesuit's bark," Fitch replies. "That's quinine-containing cinchona bark, used in Europe and the colonies for fevers, especially malaria. In a smallpox context, it's not a cure, but it's one of the few things that might calm feverish misery. It's a mainstream tool of the era, imported and prized, expensive enough that people talk about it like it's gold dust." The boy swallows and makes a face like he just licked a shoe. "Good," Fitch says. "Now, keep him warm. Don't overheat. Clean cloths, and no visitors." The mother nods fiercely, as if nodding hard enough will protect her son. When they leave, Fitch turns to the girl with the cloth. Her fever is higher. She's shivering despite the warmth of the room. Her mother has already tried everything: garlic, vinegar water, prayer, and a poultice made from crushed onions and lard. The girl smells like a kitchen and fear. Fitch checks her throat, feels her pulse, then steps back. "This isn't pox," he says. "This is throat fever, scarlet fever, diphtheria, strep. Any number of throat infections could be hiding under those words. They don't have the names, but they have the pattern. Fever, sore throat, weakness, and sometimes a nasty turn." He prepares a gargle from salt and herbs. Then he does something that makes your stomach drop anyway. He reaches for the lancet. "Must bleed her," he says. The mother's face tightens. "She's so small. Small bodies overheat," Fitch insists. "We cool the blood." You watch the mother hesitate, jaw working. She's trying to choose between authority and instinct. Fitch is the town doctor. He's a man with tools and confidence. Her instinct says she's already weak. Historians still argue whether bloodletting in children was more harmful than helpful. But standing here, you don't need a debate to feel the wrongness of it. The girl's eyes flutter as Fitch ties a strip around her arm. "You want to stop it." "You don't. This century isn't built for your objections." The cut is small, but the girl whimpers, and it hits you harder than any adult scream did. There's something about a child's pain that feels like an accusation. The mother turns away, biting her knuckle until it goes white after a few moments. Fitch stops. He wraps the arm. He tells the mother to keep the girl sipping warm broth, to let her rest, to watch her breathing. In his mind, he's done the necessary thing. The mother gathers her child and leaves, shoulders hunched like she's carrying a storm. Out in the waiting room, you see a father coaxing his son to swallow a spoonful of thick molasses mixed with sulfur. "Cleans the blood," he whispers. The boy gags and tries to spit. The father holds his jaw shut. You see love and fear twisted into something unrecognizable. A girl in the corner is making little dolls out of cloth scraps. She's calm, focused, as if crafting control out of fabric. Her mother rubs her back, eyes scanning the room for danger that could be in anyone's breath. You realize sickness in children isn't just medical here. It's cultural. It's a test of faith, a test of family, a test of endurance. Parents will try anything because losing a child is common enough to be a shadow in every home, and yet never common enough to feel bearable. You step outside for air and find yourself near the inoculation outbuilding. From a distance, you see children playing quietly in the yard, the inoculated ones, their energy returning. One boy laughs, and the sound feels like sunlight through clouds. Not all will be spared. Some will still fall ill. Some will still die, but that laugh is proof that something besides dread exists. You walk back toward town, the streets still subdued, but you notice something new. Parents talking not just about prayer or charms, but about careful measures, isolation, clean cloth, watching fever. The town is learning, slowly, painfully, like a child touching a hot stove and remembering. In this era, progress is rarely clean. It comes mixed with superstition, with harmful traditions, with good intentions that hurt. But you can feel the shift. Small as it is, less guessing, more observing, less God wills it, more what can we do? And in the middle of it all, children keep breathing, keep crying, keep laughing when they can, tiny, stubborn engines of life in a town that's trying to remember how to protect them. Once the smallpox fear cools from a roar into a constant, low burn. The town's attention drifts back to the everyday disasters that never stopped. You notice it like a change in weather. People still glance suspiciously at spots and coughs, but they also start complaining again about the things they complain about when they're not actively imagining the apocalypse. The price of salt, the smell of the tannery, and, of course, the state of everyone's digestion. Because in 1700s America, your belly is basically a second boss fight. Food is seasonal. Meat is salted until it could survive a shipwreck. Vegetables are boiled into surrender, and clean water is more of a rumor than a guarantee. The result is that half the town is either constipated, cramping, or sprinting for an outhouse like their life depends on it. Sometimes it does. You get pulled into it the way you always do, by hearing someone say, "You should ask Fitch. There's a man at the tavern named Silas who looks like he's been carved out of a barrel. Red-faced, sweating, holding his stomach like it's betraying him. He keeps disappearing out back every 10 minutes, returning paler each time, as if the outhouse is slowly extracting his soul. Bad meat, someone says. Bad water, someone else argues. A curse, adds the most helpful drunk in the room. Silas finally slaps a coin down and staggers outside, and for reasons you can't defend to any sane person, you follow. He heads straight to Fitch's place, hunched like an old man. Fitch is in the doorway when you arrive, as if he's been expecting this exact digestive calamity. He takes one look at Silas and nods. "Dysentery," he says, casually, like naming a neighbor's dog. Or flux. Either way, Your insides are trying to escape. Silas groans. Make it stop. Fitch gestures him inside. Sit, don't bleed on my chair. The waiting room has that faint sour smell you now associate with illness and fear. Fitch's assistant brings water, then thinks better of it and brings weak tea instead. You watch Silas tremble as he lowers himself onto the bench. Fitch begins his questioning, and it's oddly intimate. How many times today? He asks. Silas looks offended. Do we need to count? Yes, Fitch says. Your body's keeping score. Silas mutters a number. Fitch winces. That many and you'll be empty enough to float? Fitch's mainstream approach for digestive trouble is a strange mix of the sensible and the unhinged. He recommends boiled water and thin broth, which is genuinely helpful. Then he suggests a purge, which is like responding to a house fire by throwing extra matches inside to burn out the bad. He reaches for a jar of powdered rhubarb and another of something darker. This will settle you, he says. Mixing. And this will bind you. What is it? Silas croaks. Rhubarb, Fitch says. And opium. Opium again. The town's greatest friend and quiet enemy. It will slow the gut, dull pain, and ease cramps. It will also make you woozy, constipated, and dependent if taken too often. But right now, Silas looks like he'd drink swamp water if it promised relief. Silas swallows the mixture, grimacing. Fitch leans in, voice low. No salted pork, he orders. No ale, no greasy pies, only broth, rice if you have it, and clean water. Silas laughs. Weak and bitter. Clean water. Sure, I'll just squeeze it out of the air. Fitch's eyes narrow. Boil it, he snaps. That's the big pivot right there. The idea that boiling water can prevent illness is creeping into practice, even if nobody can explain germs. Miasma theory still rules the language, but experience is teaching a different lesson. People who boil water sometimes get less sick. It's not magic. It's the world quietly hinting at microbiology while everyone argues about bad air. Historians still argue how quickly early communities adopted boiling and sanitation measures and whether those measures were widespread or rare. In this town, you can feel it emerging slowly, unevenly, like a habit that forms only after enough suffering. Silas is sent home with instructions and a small packet of powder. Fitch tells him to rest, to isolate if the flux worsens. To keep warm, you watch Silas shuffle out, grateful but still doomed looking. Then Fitch turns his attention to the bigger problem, the town's diet itself. Salted pork is everywhere. It's calorie-dense. It's the backbone of winter survival. But it's also a ticket to dehydration and misery if you don't have fresh food to balance it. People eat hard bread, pickled vegetables, boiled turnips, dried peas. Fruit is rare in winter unless it's dried. Fresh greens are a memory. Add in unclean water, and your intestines spend half the year in rebellion. You see a woman later that day carrying a pot of something pale and thick to her sick child. Gruel, she says. Doctor says it's gentle. Gruel is gentle. Yes. It's also so bland your tongue threatens to resign. Still, it feeds you when you can't keep anything else down. Fitch's advice, when he's not bleeding or dosing mercury, sometimes lands on the simplest truth. Rest and simple food can do what his tools cannot. But the town doesn't always listen. At supper, in a neighbor's home, you watch a man shovel salted pork and beans into his mouth, sweating as he eats. Keeps the strength up, he says. 20 minutes later, he's outside clutching his belly and cursing softly at the night. A teenager boasts that he never gets sick because he drinks cider instead of water. Then he spends the next day in bed with cramps, proving that confidence is not an immune system. That week, you have your own digestive reckoning. It starts after a meal of salted pork, boiled turnips, and bread so hard you could repair a fence with it. You drink what you hope is clean water. By midnight, your stomach turns on you like a betrayed friend. You stumble outside toward the outhouse. Every step a negotiation. The air is cold and sharp, and the stars above look indifferent. In the outhouse, you experience a personal crisis that makes you understand why dysentery has been known to wipe out armies. You grip the rough wood, sweating, whispering promises to every saint you can remember. By morning, you're hollow and shaky. You sit on your bed and think, in a dazed, sincere way. So this is how people die of diarrhea. You drag yourself to Fitch, because apparently you have learned nothing. He takes one look at your face and snorts. Turnips got you? You glare weakly. He laughs like it's charming. He doesn't bleed you this time. Thank God. He gives you broth instructions, tells you to boil water, and offers you a tiny dose of laudanum only if the cramping is a beast. He also suggests a tea made from blackberry root to bind the gut. This is the weird blend again, opium and folk plant medicine side by side. In a way, it's the entire century in one cup. You follow his advice because you have no pride left. You sip broth, you boil water, you rest. You avoid pork like it personally insulted you. 2 days later, you can stand without seeing stars. You walk outside and breathe in air that feels cleaner than any medicine. The town goes on. People hauling water, chopping wood, arguing about inoculation and sin, laughing carefully as if laughter might tempt sickness back. Your belly still feels uncertain. But you're alive. Again, you start to see why so many colonial cures focus on digestion. If you can control the gut, you can control the feeling that your body is slipping away from you. In a world where disease is constant, the belly is the battlefield everyone fights on daily, and you can't help it. As you pass the market, you see a barrel of salted pork and feel a flicker of fear. Not smallpox fear, not war fear. A simpler, truer fear. Outhouse fear. Your digestion finally stops staging a coup. And with that small mercy, you almost start believing you've earned a quiet week. The town is still tense from the pox scare, still jumpy, still doing that thing where everyone pretends they're fine while side-eyeing every sneeze like it's a loaded musket. But the market is open again. People are laughing again. Cautiously. Like laughter is a candle you shield with your hand. Then your tooth reminds you that peace is not for you. It starts as a dull ache, a background throb, like someone tapping a tiny hammer behind your cheekbone. You try ignoring it, because you are now deeply aware of what happens when you bring problems to Dr. Fitch. But the ache grows teeth of its own. It radiates up into your ear, down into your jaw. By the second night, you're sitting in bed with your fist pressed to your face, sweating, bargaining with the universe like a desperate merchant. You tell yourself it will pass. It does not pass. By morning, your cheek is swollen and warm. You can taste something sour at the back of your mouth. Infection, probably. The kind that turns toothaches into fevers and fevers into funerals. So you go, again, like a moth returning to the candle that already burned it. Fitch greets you with a kind of grin that suggests he enjoys dental work the way some men enjoy hunting. Ah, he says, peering at your face. Your jaw's throwing a tantrum. You try to talk, but opening your mouth sends a sharp bolt through your skull. Your vision blurs. Fitch nods like he's been given permission to do something terrible. Sit, he orders. He pulls out the tools. There's a reason people in this century lose their molars early. Sugar is creeping into diets. Hygiene is minimal, and dentistry is basically brute force. Toothbrushes exist, technically. But most people use cloth, salt, charcoal, or simply nothing. Cavities go unchecked. Abscesses form. Pain becomes normal until it becomes unbearable. And when it becomes unbearable, Someone like Fitch grabs iron. He pokes your swollen cheek, presses around the gum. You flinch. Abscess, he says. Satisfied. Pus pocket. Pressure's what's killing you. He's right. That pressure is a monster. Fitch doesn't reach for a gentle remedy. He reaches for a small blade and a curved instrument that looks like it was designed for catching fish. We drain it, he says. Your eyes widen. You shake your head. Too weak to argue. Fitch's assistant holds your shoulders. Fitch wedges your mouth open with a wooden block that tastes like every previous patient's fear, then presses the blade into your gum. The pain is white hot. You jerk. The assistant tightens his grip. Fitch keeps going, calm, exact. Then, suddenly, a rush. A foul metallic taste floods your mouth. Thick and bitter. You gag. You almost cry with relief because the pressure releases like a storm breaking. Fitch spits into a bowl and nods. There, he says. That's the devil leaving. You sit there panting. Saliva and blood and infection mixing at the corner of your lip. Fitch wipes your chin with a cloth that may once have been part of a shirt. Your whole body trembles. But the ache, the deep pulsing pressure, is quieter now. Now, Fitch says. We decide whether we keep the tooth. You stare at him like he's suggesting you negotiate with a bear. He leans closer, peering at the molar. He taps it with an instrument. You flinch again, but less. Rot, he mutters. It will return. Best to pull it. You know he's probably right. An abscess like that can come back. It can spread. In a pre-antibiotic world, tooth infections are not cute. They can kill you with slow, stubborn certainty. You nod. Barely. Fitch brightens. Good. Hold still. He reaches for the dental pelican again, that curved lever of misery you watched him use before. He positions it against your tooth. The assistant braces your head. Fitch gives you a cup first. Whiskey, he says. For courage. You drink, it burns. It doesn't numb much, but it gives you the illusion of bravery, which is apparently the best the century can do. He sets the pelican, checks the angle, then pulls. The sound is worse than the pain. A dull crack, like snapping a thick twig close to your ear. Your vision flashes. Your hands claw at the chair. The assistant's grip holds you in place as Fitch yanks again, twisting. For a moment it feels like your entire skull is coming with it. Then it's out. Fitch holds the tooth up between thumb and forefinger like a prize. The root is long and dark, ugly with rot. There, he says proudly. That tooth was plotting against you. You want to laugh. You also want to collapse. He tosses the tooth into a tin with others. You hear it clink against old enamel like a tiny funeral bell. You swallow hard, tasting blood. Mainstream fact of the moment. Colonial dentistry is often performed by barber surgeons like Fitch, using tools like the pelican and later the dental key. It's painful, dangerous, and common because decay is widespread and restorative dentistry is limited. The goal is often simply removal. Then Fitch does something that makes your skin crawl in a different way. He produces a small drill, not a modern drill, nothing with speed or precision. A hand-cranked instrument. He turns it slowly, examining it like he's considering whether to use it on you. What's that for? You ask. Voice thick, he smiles. Trephining. You freeze. Trephining is the practice of drilling or scraping a hole into the skull. It's ancient, older than written history. Sometimes it's done to relieve pressure after head trauma. Sometimes it's done for seizures or headaches. Sometimes it's done because someone thinks evil spirits need an exit door. Fitch notices your terror and laughs. Not for you, he says. Not today, unless your headache returns and you get rude about it. Light joke, but it lands like a cold pebble. Historians still argue how often trephining in the colonial period was performed for genuine trauma relief versus spiritual or misguided reasons. The records are spotty. The anecdotes are vivid. And the line between medical procedure and folk belief is blurry. Fitch packs your empty socket with a bit of cloth soaked in clove oil. Clove is one of the few truly helpful dental pain remedies people have, numbing and aromatic. It stings, but in a way that feels almost kind. He gives you instructions. Rinse with salt water. Avoid hard bread. Don't poke the hole with your tongue like an idiot. You nod solemnly, immediately poking it with your tongue the second he looks away because you are, unfortunately, a human. Outside, the world sounds louder. Your mouth throbs, but the deep, relentless agony is gone. The air smells of wood smoke and manure and winter. You walk carefully, jaw tight, feeling like you've survived a small private war. At home, you try to eat gruel and fail. You try to drink water and dribble it down your chin like a sad baby. You lie down, swallowing your own blood and saliva, listening to the wind push against the shutters. That night, you dream of teeth falling like hail. In the morning, the swelling is still there, but it's softer, less angry. You can open your mouth without seeing stars. You're bruised and sore and a little traumatized, but you're not poisoned by your own infection anymore. You catch your reflection in a basin of water and notice something. Your face is slightly lopsided now. The gap in your mouth a new empty space. A reminder that medicine here often means subtraction. Remove the bad. Remove the limb. Remove the tooth. Remove the blood. It's crude, sometimes effective, and always a little haunting. You step outside and breathe. The town continues around you. Somewhere a child laughs. Somewhere a pot boils. Somewhere Fitch is sharpening tools, ready for the next body to arrive with its complaints and betrayals. And you walk on, newly missing a molar, feeling older in a way you can't quite explain. You spend the next few days living on broth and spite, your tongue constantly wandering toward the new empty space in your mouth like it's trying to check on a missing neighbor. The pain fades from sharp to sore, and with that fading comes an odd clarity. Fitch did help you. In his rough, iron-fisted way, he solved a problem that would have otherwise sat in your skull and rotted you from the inside out. So you try, for one full afternoon, to feel grateful. Then you walk past the market and see Fitch selling miracle drops out of a crate like he's hawking apples. He's set up near the butcher, where the air already smells like death and commerce. A small crowd gathers, mostly older men and a few women with baskets on their arms, eyes tired from carrying too much worry. Fitch stands behind his crate, coat buttoned, voice booming. "Cures the ague," he announces, holding up a little bottle. "Settles the belly, calms the nerves, helps a man sleep without dreaming of hellfire." You stop short. This isn't his office. This isn't a private consult. This is a performance. He's smiling wider than usual. And for the first time you notice something. Fitch likes being admired. He likes the crowd, the attention, the way people lean in when he speaks. He shakes the bottle, and the liquid inside glints amber in the sun. "What is it?" someone asks. Fitch winks. "Secret mixture. Of course it is." You push closer, pretending you're just another curious buyer. You can see the bottles more clearly now. Handwritten labels, wax seals, no ingredients listed. Fitch's assistant stands nearby with a ledger, cheeks red from the cold, eyes darting like he's both proud and ashamed. A woman in the front holds out a coin. "My husband's cough," she says. "He's had it since harvest." Fitch nods sympathetically and hands her a bottle. "2 drops in warm ale each night," he says. "If he worsens, add a third." The woman clutches it like treasure. A man steps up next. "My joints," he groans. "Feels like I got rocks in my knees." Fitch hands him another bottle. "Rub it in," he says, "and drink a spoonful weekly. It loosens the humors." You stare. drink it and rub it in. It's a cure that doesn't commit to a single method, which is always suspicious. This is where you realize Fitch isn't just a doctor, he's also a businessman. And in 1700s America, the line between physician and quack is sometimes a chalk mark in the dirt, easy to smudge with a boot. Mainstream fact: patent medicines and proprietary remedies were widespread in the 18th century, sold with bold claims, secret formulas, and plenty of showmanship. Some contained useful ingredients like alcohol or opiates. Others contained dangerous ones like mercury or antimony. Many were simply flavored spirits with a story. Historians still argue how many colonial practitioners knowingly sold ineffective nostrums versus how many genuinely believed in them. It's hard to separate greed from faith when people are desperate and science is still half myth. You watch Fitch work the crowd. He jokes. He compliments people's hats. He speaks about illness like it's a sneaky thief he's personally fought in hand-to-hand combat. People love it. They want a hero, not uncertainty. Then you see something that makes your stomach drop in a familiar way. Fitch's assistant opens a small wooden box and reveals a powder, pale gray, almost silvery. Fitch gestures to it with ceremony. For stubborn cases, he says, a pinch in broth clears the system. Mercury? You think immediately. The crowd murmurs in impressed awe, because they don't hear poison, they hear power. In this era, harsh medicine reads as strong medicine. If it burns, it must be doing something. A man in the crowd laughs. Fitch, you could sell river water and call it holy. Fitch grins. Don't tempt me. You're not sure if that's a joke. Later, you follow him back toward his office, keeping your distance. He moves with an easy swagger, coin pouch heavier at his belt. He pauses by the tavern and exchanges a few words with a man you recognize as a card player. You watch Fitch slip him something small. A coin, a note, maybe a bottle. Gambling debts. You remember hearing rumors always float around Fitch like pipe smoke, that he plays cards late into the night, that he bets more than he can afford, that sometimes his medical fees go straight from the patient's hand to the tavern's pocket. You start seeing his practice in a new light. The constant need to earn, the extra bottles, the public performance, the way he pushes certain treatments, not just because he believes in them, but because they sell. That night, you end up at the tavern. Not because you want to, but because everyone ends up at the tavern eventually. It's the town's second meeting house, only louder and stickier. Fitch is there, laughing with two men at a corner table. A deck of cards lies spread out. Coins and chipped tokens form little piles like miniature fortresses. Fitch's cheeks are flushed. He looks relaxed in a way you never see when he's holding a saw. You sit at the bar and pretend not to listen. Lucky hand, one man mutters. Lucky mind, Fitch replies, tapping his temple. Same as medicine. You read the signs. Someone asks about his remedies. Fitch shrugs. People want bottles, he says. They want to feel like they're doing something. If I don't sell it, someone else will. Might as well be me. That sentence sticks with you. It's pragmatic, maybe even true. But it also feels like the kind of reasoning that lets a man slide slowly into something darker without noticing. A woman approaches Fitch at the tavern, face drawn. Doctor, she says quietly, my baby won't stop crying. He won't latch. He's hot. Fitch's smile fades. For a moment. The salesman drops away and the doctor appears again. He stands, listens, asks a few quick questions. He tells her to meet him at his office at dawn. No bottle, no show, just urgency. You see both sides of him in one blink. He's not a cartoon villain twirling his mustache. He's a man caught between need and duty, between belief and profit, between helping and hustling. He lives in a world where medical care isn't standardized, where desperation is a marketplace, and where being the doctor doesn't guarantee you'll eat unless people keep paying. Still, you can't shake the image of him selling miracle drops by the butcher stall, smiling while people cling to hope in a bottle. On your way home, you pass a house with a candle burning in the window, a sick room. You imagine the mother inside, counting her baby's breaths, praying the fever breaks. You imagine her clutching a bottle Fitch sold her, dosing the child because she has nothing else. You realize quackery isn't just fraud here. It's a symptom, a bruise left by ignorance, scarcity, and fear. In a few centuries, people will look back and laugh at patent medicines, at snake oil, at powdered miracles. But you can't laugh now, because you're watching how they fill a hole where reliable care should be. You reach your bed, jaw still sore, mind buzzing. You stare at the ceiling and think about how medicine in this town is a strange blend of skill, superstition, ambition, and necessity. And you wonder, uneasily, how many bottles Fitch sold today, and how many of them will actually help. After you see Fitch selling bottles like he's running a traveling theater troupe, you start noticing how badly people want meaning in their sickness. Not just a cure, a reason, a pattern, something they can hold on to when their body feels like a badly managed tavern brawl. And when medicine can't offer certainty, the moon steps in like it's been waiting for its cue. It begins with a neighbor, old Mrs. Pritchard, catching you by the fence with the conspiratorial energy of someone about to share the town's most urgent secret. "Full moon tomorrow," she whispers. You blink. Yes, she points a crooked finger at your face like she's diagnosing you from across the yard. "That's when you treat gout," she says. "That's when you set bones. That's when you pull teeth if you don't want the bleeding to go on forever." You almost laugh. But then you remember you literally watched people treat illness with dried toad and leeches. So honestly, moon logic doesn't even crack the top 10 weirdest things you've heard this month. By evening, you realize she's not alone. The town is buzzing with lunar scheduling. People are planning their aches around the sky like it's a calendar written by fate. A man delays having his finger lanced because the moon is wrong. A woman insists her baby's colic worsens when the moon wanes. Someone swears their nightmares leave on the new moon like rent is due, mysteriously. No one claims the moon makes their taxes easier, which is how you know this isn't a perfect system. Fitch, of course, pretends to be above it. He scoffs when you mention moon cures, waving his hand like he's swatting a fly. "Superstitious nonsense," he says, then pauses. "Though I do prefer certain procedures when the tides are calmer." You stare at him. He clears his throat. "Less bleeding," he mutters. So even Fitch, man of saws and silver spoons, is not immune to a little cosmic bargaining. The truth is, lots of 18th century medical thinking is tangled with astrology and seasonal beliefs. The body is seen as part of nature's machinery. If the moon moves oceans, why wouldn't it move blood? That's the logic. Mainstream fact. Almanacs were hugely popular in colonial America, and many included medical advice tied to lunar phases, zodiac signs, and favorable days for treatments like bleeding or purging. People planned planting, travel, and yes, doctor visits using these guides. Historians still argue how much of this was sincere belief versus tradition and habit. But you can feel sincerity in the way people speak. They're not joking. They're scared, and the sky feels steadier than Fitch's promises. The next night, the full moon rises fat and bright, spilling pale light over the town like milk. You walk toward the edge of the common, drawn by noise. There's a small crowd gathered near a barn, lanterns flickering, faces lifted. At the center is a man named Reuben who's been limping for weeks, complaining of fire in his foot, gout. Likely, though no one says it with confidence. His toe is swollen. Red, angry looking. Reuben sits on a stool with his boot off, sweating and grimacing. Beside him stands Mrs. Pritchard, holding a bowl of warm water and a bundle of herbs. She looks like a priestess of practical suffering. "Moon's at its peak," she says. Now, she dips the herbs in the water and presses them to Reuben's foot. The smell rises sharp and green. Mugwort. Maybe. Something bitter. Reuben hisses, then exhales. "It's drawing it out," someone murmurs. "Reverend," Mrs. Pritchard chants softly. Not words exactly, more like a rhythm of old phrases. She tells Reuben to breathe. She tells him to imagine the pain draining away into the earth, carried down by moonlight. Is it medicine? Not in the modern sense, but Reuben's shoulders unclench. The crowd relaxes. The ritual gives them all a role to play besides helpless witness. And that, you realize, is half the point. A teenage boy nearby whispers that he heard witches use the full moon to steal youth from the sick. Another boy swears his uncle's moon water cured his sadness. Someone else insists moonlight can spoil milk faster, which may actually be true if you leave the milk out all night and blame the moon instead of your choices. You drift closer, listening. Reuben's wife thanks Mrs. Pritchard with tears in her eyes. "He slept last night," she says. "Just a little. Maybe the moon will finish the work." Mrs. Pritchard nods solemnly. "The moon finishes what the body begins," she says. Which sounds wise until you remember she also believes you shouldn't cut your hair on a waning moon or it'll grow back weak and resentful. Meanwhile, a different group has gathered behind the barn. Quieter, more secretive. You wander over and find a young woman sitting on a crate, hands clasped, eyes closed. Two older women stand around her holding candles. The air smells of lavender and smoke. "What's this?" you ask softly. One woman glances at you with suspicion, then decides you're harmless. "Heartbreak," she whispers. She's been listless. Won't eat. Won't sleep. We're giving her moon peace. They hold the candles near her. Not to burn, just to warm the air. They rub a bit of oil on her wrists. They murmur prayers and small encouragements. No lancet, no mercury, just attention, scent, and a ritual that tells her, you're not alone. It's easy to mock moon cures until you see what they're really doing. They're a community's attempt to care in a world where official care is crude and uncertain. They're comfort wrapped in tradition. They're a way to make pain feel less random. Still, not all moon medicine is gentle. A farmer insists on being bled under the full moon because he believes it thins the bad blood. His friend holds a basin. Fitch isn't there, but someone has a knife and too much confidence. The cut goes wrong. Blood flows faster than expected. Panic spreads like spilled oil. A woman screams for Fitch. You watch from a distance as the farmer turns pale, then grayish, his eyes rolling. Someone finally ties a strip tight above the wound. Another presses a rag. They manage to stop the bleeding, but the farmer is left shaking and weak, his face wet with sweat and fear. That's the danger of cosmic certainty. It gives people the courage to do reckless things. Later, you pass Fitch's house and see a faint light in the window. You imagine him inside, writing notes, scoffing at superstition, then glancing up at the moon anyway. Even the practical get pulled by the sky when fear rises. As you walk home under the moon's cold glow, you feel how the town is stitched together by these beliefs. Almanacs on tables, moonlight on hands, small rituals in barns and kitchens, little jokes and prayers offered like bandages. You also feel how fragile it all is, how quickly comfort becomes conviction, how easily conviction becomes harm. You pause in the road and look up. The moon hangs there, indifferent and perfect, shining on the healthy and the sick alike. It doesn't choose, it doesn't judge, it just moves, steady as time. And that steadiness, in a world where bodies fail so easily, is exactly why people keep begging it for help. You head home, your breath clouding in the air, and you can't decide whether to be amused or humbled. So you settle for being quietly awake. The full moon fades, and with it some of the town's softer rituals. People stop standing in barns with candles and start standing in doorways with crossed arms again. Watching each other like suspicion is a weather pattern. You think you've seen the whole spectrum of colonial care now. The blood bowls, the leeches, the miracle bottles, the moonlight chanting. Then you hear about the cellar. It comes up the way the ugliest truths always do, half-joked and quickly corrected. Like the speaker regrets letting it slip. "You know," a man at the tavern says, leaning into his ale, "if you start hearing angels, they'll put you under the meeting house." His friend snorts. "Not angels, devils. Angels would be polite." The first man shrugs. "Either way, you won't be." They laugh, a little too loudly, and the laugh dies too fast. You catch Fitch's assistant nearby, staring into his cup like he's reading a drowning man's fortune. He doesn't laugh at all. You step outside, cold air cutting through the stale tavern warmth, and you realize you've been collecting a map of this town's fears. Disease, injury, childbirth, infection. But the biggest fear might be the one nobody wants to name: the mind slipping its leash. In this century, madness is a bucket word. It holds grief, trauma, psychosis, dementia, epilepsy, depression, postpartum distress, alcohol withdrawal, and plain old eccentricity. If you don't fit, you're called possessed, bewitched, sinful, or simply not right. Sometimes you're treated with prayer, sometimes with bleeding, sometimes with chains. You find out which is used here when Mrs. Pritchard corners you by the well. Eyes sharp. "Don't go poking at the cellar," she says. You blink. "I wasn't," she cuts you off. "Good. Curiosity makes corpses." That's dramatic, coming from a woman who thinks the moon schedules your organs. But it's also sincere. So naturally you do the worst possible thing and poke at the cellar anyway. It's not even a long walk. That's the part that makes your skin crawl. The place where they keep the towns troubled is not some distant institution. It's right there, tucked under the meeting house like a secret shame the community sits on top of every Sunday. You wait until late afternoon when the street is quiet and the light slants gold through bare branches. You circle behind the meeting house, past stacked firewood and a muddy patch where someone dumped ash. There, half hidden by boards, is a low door. It's small enough to make you crouch. A crude iron latch holds it shut. You hesitate, hand hovering, suddenly aware that this is not like peeking at herbs or watching a procedure. This is crossing into a human boundary. Then you hear it, a soft sound. Not quite a voice, not quite an animal. A rhythmic murmur, like someone counting or praying or arguing with the air. Your spine tightens. You lift the latch. The smell hits first. Damp earth, mold, old straw, and something sour that might be fears given time to ferment. The air is colder inside, heavy and still. You step down 2 rough steps into a space so low you have to bend your neck. A lantern hangs from a beam, barely lit, throwing shadows that move like nervous thoughts. In the far corner, a figure sits on the dirt floor. He looks up when you enter, and for a moment your brain tries to make him into a monster because that would be easier. He's not. He's just a man. Thin, unshaven, wearing a shirt that used to be white. His eyes are wide but not wild. More like exhausted. A chain loops around his ankle, attached to a ring in the wall. You swallow hard, and your mouth goes dry in a way that has nothing to do with fever. "Hello," you say softly. As if volume might break him, he stares at you. then laughs once, short and cracked. "You're new," he says. His voice is clear, not demon-possessed, not babbling, just human. You take a cautious step closer. The chain clinks. He watches the sound like it's an enemy. "What happened?" you ask. He blinks slowly. "I saw my brother drown," he says. "Then I stopped sleeping. Then I started shouting at night. The minister said it was Satan. Fitch said it was hot blood. The council said it was bad for the town's peace." He lifts his chained ankle slightly. "So they gave me quiet." Your stomach twists. Mainstream fact, ugly and plain. In colonial America, people with severe mental illness or disruptive behavior were often confined in jails, private homes, or poorhouse-like spaces. Dedicated psychiatric institutions were rare until later, and treatment frequently meant restraint, isolation, and religious interpretation rather than medical care. The man's name is Thomas. He tells you between pauses that they bled him twice. They made him drink bitter tonics. They prayed over him until his throat hurt from answering. When he still woke screaming, they brought him here. "Sometimes," he says, "they forget I'm down here." You look around and see a bucket in the corner, half covered, a pile of straw that serves as bedding, a crust of old candle wax on a rock that must be his only light when the lantern goes out. The walls are damp. The ceiling is so low you imagine the building itself pressing down. A small, cruel thought flickers through you. At least the womb isn't wandering down here. Then you hate yourself for it. But your brain reaches for jokes the way it reaches for air. You hear footsteps above. Someone moving in the meeting house. The muffled sound of a bench scraping. Life continuing, literally, over his head. Thomas tilts his head. "They sing up there," he says. "On Sundays." You can hear it. It sounds like it's for someone else. You feel that sentence lodge in you. You ask if anyone ever helps him. He shrugs. "Sometimes the minister brings a psalm," he says. "Sometimes Fitch brings a draft that makes my mouth numb and my thoughts slow. Laudanum? You think, the same blanket of opium offered for so many different kinds of suffering. Here it's used not to heal, but to quiet, to smooth the edges until a person fits the town's tolerance." Historians still argue how much early madness confinement was driven by genuine safety concerns versus social control, especially when behaviors were inconvenient or embarrassing rather than dangerous. Standing here, you can feel both truths coiled together. Thomas might have scared people. Yes, but he is also being erased for the crime of grief that spilled out loud. In the dirt near Thomas's straw pile, you notice something that makes you pause. A little bundle of dried herbs, tied with twine. It's tucked carefully into a crack between stones. "What's that?" you ask. Thomas's eyes flick to it, almost shy. "A woman left it," he says. "The herb lady. She said it helps with bad dreams. Lavender, maybe valerian, mugwort. Something meant for sleep, something gentle, a tiny act of care smuggled into a place built for forgetting. Quirky, tidbit, quietly rebellious. Some communities relied on folk healers and midwives for mental distress too, using calming teas, ritual comfort, and practical listening long before anyone called it therapy. Not a cure-all, but sometimes the first kindness a person received. Thomas looks at you steadily. "Are you real?" he asks suddenly. You blink. "Yes," he nods, as if testing the answer. "Sometimes," he says. "I hear water when there is none. I think I'm back at the river. I wake up shouting. I can't stop it." You want to tell him it makes sense, that grief does this, that the brain replays terror like a stuck wheel. But the sentry doesn't have those words, and you're not sure you're allowed to bring them into this cellar. So you do the only thing you can. You sit down, carefully, on a low stone a few feet away. The damp seeps through your trousers immediately, which is the cellar's way of reminding you this is not a place for visitors. You ignore it. You talk to him like he's a person, not a problem, not a demon. You ask about his brother. You listen as he describes the river's sound, the way the current pulled, the way his brother's hat floated away first. His voice trembles, then steadies, then trembles again. Above you, a door slams. Thomas flinches. His chain rattles. You realize the chain isn't just holding his ankle. It's holding the town's fear in place. It's a physical promise that whatever is unpredictable can be pinned down, made small, made quiet. The chain is for them, not him. After a while, you stand. You don't want to leave him. You also know staying won't free him. This isn't a rescue story. It's a witness story, and that's its own kind of ache before you go. You reach into your pocket and pull out a small piece of bread you brought without thinking. You set it near him. Thomas looks at it, then at you. "Thank you," he says, and the softness in his voice nearly breaks you. You climb the steps and lift the latch. Daylight spills in like mercy. You close the door gently, as if gentleness can travel through wood. Outside, the town is the same. Carts, chimneys, people calling to each other. It's almost worse that it's the same. You want someone to stop, to notice the weight beneath their feet. But they don't. They keep moving. They keep living. That's what towns do. You walk home with your hands clenched, thinking about Thomas in the dark, counting sounds, waiting for someone to remember he exists. You think about how medicine here can saw off a leg, pull a tooth, drain an abscess, and still have no real language for a mind that's drowning on dry land. And you realize you've been afraid of knives and leeches and mercury. But the cellar scares you more. Because it's not an accident of ignorance. It's a choice. After the cellar, everything else feels slightly unreal, like you're walking through town with a thin film over your eyes. People laugh, barter, argue about pork prices. And you keep thinking, there is a chained man under your Sunday prayers. It makes the everyday chatter sound muffled, as if the world is embarrassed by itself. Then the world changes again, loudly. It doesn't arrive with a formal announcement. It arrives in scraps. A rider passing through with a torn coat and frantic eyes. A whispered conversation outside the meeting house. A cluster of men suddenly drilling with muskets on the common like they've always known what they're doing and definitely haven't just learned from someone equally confused. War is coming, or already here. And once it shows up, medicine stops being a messy cottage industry and becomes an emergency. One morning, Fitch's assistant finds you outside the market and grabs your sleeve. His face is pale, not with illness this time, but with the specific terror of someone who has been told to do something impossible. "A field hospital," he says. "They're setting up near the ridge. Fitch needs hands. You don't ask why you, of all people, keep getting chosen for these nightmares. You follow because the town is buzzing with that tight electric energy that comes before disaster. And resisting it feels like trying to stand still in a river. The hospital is a tent. Several tents, actually. Stitched together with rope and urgency. They're pitched on muddy ground, because of course they are. The wind flaps the canvas. Smoke drifts from a small fire where water boils in blackened pots. Men shout. Horses snort. Somewhere, someone is crying out in pain with the blunt honesty of a body that has been broken. You step inside, and the smell hits you like a wall. Blood, sweat, wet wool, dirty straw, vinegar, smoke, and the sour, unmistakable stench of fear. Fitch is there, sleeves rolled up, apron on, face set. He looks less like a salesman now and more like a man in a storm, grim and fast. He spots you and nods once. "Good," he says. "You're not fainting today." That feels like both encouragement and threat. In one corner of the tent, a row of wounded men lies on straw pallets. Some groan. Some stare blankly at the canvas roof. One man clutches his abdomen, fingers slippery with blood. Another has a bandaged head and eyes that don't track right, as if his mind is still stumbling after his body stopped. You move carefully, trying not to step in anything you'll regret. This is battlefield medicine, colonial style. No antibiotics, no blood transfusions, no sterile surgery. What they do have is speed, improvisation, and a few supplies that would look like props in a play if the screams weren't so real. Fitch barks orders. Boil more water. Rip cloth into strips. Keep the lamp steady. You and the assistant tear sheets into bandages. A woman from town, recruited in a hurry, stirs a pot of something dark and herbal. Fitch calls it wine and bark. Alcohol and cinchona again. Used to steady men and dull pain, to prevent shock, to give the illusion of warmth and strength. Mainstream fact. During the Revolutionary era, field hospitals were often makeshift, crowded, and unsanitary. Surgeons relied on amputations, basic wound cleaning, and whatever materials they had available. Infection, dysentery, typhus, and other camp diseases often killed more than bullets did. The first procedure you witness is brutal in its simplicity. A soldier is brought in with a shattered forearm, bone jagged under torn skin. He's young. He looks at Fitch with pleading eyes. "Please," he whispers. "Please don't." Fitch's face softens for one heartbeat, then hardens again. "If we keep it," he says. "It rots you," the young man shakes. Tears spilling. Someone forces a cup of rum between his lips. Another man hands him a stick. He bites down so hard you hear wood crack. Fitch doesn't waste time. He tightens a tourniquet, checks the sore, and begins. The sound is a low, rasping grind. Nothing like the clean slice you imagine from stories. It's work. It takes effort. The soldier's muffled scream vibrates through the stick. Your stomach flips, but your hands keep moving because Fitch is shouting for cloth, and you can't be the person who freezes now. You pass bandages. You hold a lamp. You keep your eyes on Fitch's hands because looking at the soldier's face would break you when it's done. Fitch cauterizes the stump, pressing a heated iron to stop bleeding. The smell of burned flesh rises, and your brain tries to leave your body. You swallow hard and stay. Fitch wraps the stump tightly. "Next," he says, voice flat. That word, next, is terrifying. It means this is routine. It means there are more bodies than time. In another corner, a man is shot through the thigh. Fitch probes the wound with forceps, searching for the ball. The man grits his teeth, eyes squeezed shut. Fitch pulls out a flattened musket ball, black and ugly, and drops it into a tin with a dull clink. "You'll keep that," Fitch says, almost casually. "Some men wear them as luck." The soldier laughs weakly, like he's not sure if that's a joke. It might be. It might not. You see improvisation everywhere. Moss packed into a wound to absorb blood. Wine used to rinse dirty cuts. A strip of shirt turned into a sling. A mixture of honey and herbs applied to a gash. Because honey sometimes actually helps as an antimicrobial, though they don't call it that. It's one of those rare moments where folk practice brushes against real biology by accident. A man collapses from fever in the tent. Not wounded, but sick. Camp fever, they call it. Could be typhus. Could be dysentery. Could be something unnamed that spreads in close quarters. Fitch looks at him with the same grim seriousness as the amputees. Disease doesn't care about uniforms. Historians still argue whether Revolutionary War medical improvements came mainly from necessity, from increased organization, or from emerging European ideas. But you can feel necessity squeezing practice into something sharper. War doesn't allow leisurely superstition. It demands triage. Triage is the brutal logic of deciding who gets help first, or at all. Fitch doesn't say the word, but he does it. He glances at a man with shallow breathing and a grey face and shakes his head slightly. He moves on to a man who is bleeding but alert. You feel your stomach twist again. It's not just gore. It's the cold arithmetic of survival. Outside the tent, you hear a chorus of distant cannon fire. Dull thumps rolling over the ridge like thunder. Each one means more men will come limping, carried, dragged. Each one means Fitch's next will be used again and again until his voice goes hoarse. At one point, you step out for air and find the ground churned into mud by boots and blood. A pile of discarded bandages lies near the fire, stained dark. A young drummer boy sits on a log, staring at his hands. He's not injured. He looks worse than the injured. You sit beside him for a moment. He doesn't speak. His eyes are fixed somewhere far away. You want to say something comforting. You can't find words that aren't lies. Back inside, Fitch is rinsing his saw in a bucket of water that's turned pink. He notices you watching and snorts. You thought leeches were bad, he says. You manage a weak smile. It's the closest thing to humor you can afford here. A soldier is brought in with a head wound. Scalp split. Fitch presses cloth. Speaks sharply. Keeps the man awake. Look at me, he orders. Tell me your name. The man does. Slurred. Fitch nods. Good. Stay with me. You realize then that for all his nonsense, Fitch has a core of skill forged by necessity and repetition. He knows how to keep people alive on the edge. He's seen enough blood to stop romanticizing it. He is, in this tent, exactly what the town needs. And yet, you can't stop thinking about the cellar. About Thomas chained under the meeting house. About how war will create more Thomases. Men whose minds break under what their eyes have seen. Men who will come home and shout at night. Men who will be called possessed. Men who will be quietly locked away. The field hospital works until the sun sinks. By dusk, your arms ache from hauling water and holding lamps. Your clothes smell like smoke and metal. Your hands are stained, no matter how much you scrub. Fitch finally pauses, leaning against a post, breathing hard. He looks older than he did a week ago. Go, he tells you, voice rough. Sleep while you can. Tomorrow will be worse. You walk away from the tents under a sky bruised purple, the distant thunder of war still murmuring. Your mind is buzzing. Not with fear exactly, but with a hollow shock. The world has expanded beyond town drama into something huge and hungry. You reach home and wash your hands until your skin stings. You lie down, and in the dark you hear the saw again, that rasping sound, like a relentless insect in your ear. You close your eyes and try to slow your breath. War medicine has begun, and you already know it won't end cleanly. When you wake, you can still smell the field hospital on your skin, even after scrubbing until your hands look like boiled apples. It's not just blood. It's the sense of chaos that clings, the feeling that bodies are breakable in ways you can't unsee. And yet, the town wakes up too. People fetch water, chop wood, sweep stoops, argue about the price of flour. They do it because routine is the last rope you cling to when the world starts swinging. Fitch, however, seems changed. He moves differently now, quieter, more deliberate. He doesn't perform as much in the market. He's in his office more, writing more, reading more. He has a new stack of pamphlets and notes from somewhere, smudged with travel and handling. You catch glimpses of diagrams that look more precise than his usual lumpy drawings. One afternoon, you arrive to find him in deep conversation with a man you don't recognize. The stranger's coat is cut better than most locals, and his accent carries a faint polish. He looks like someone who has read books indoors for pleasure, a dangerous type. They're arguing, not the casual tavern arguing about pigs and taxes. This is sharp, technical, almost excited. I'm telling you, the stranger says, tapping the table. The numbers matter. We must count outcomes. We must observe patterns. Fitch snorts. Counting doesn't stop a man from bleeding out. The stranger spreads his hands. No, but it tells you whether bleeding helps or harms. That sentence lands in the room like a thrown brick. You linger by the doorway, pretending you're waiting your turn. The assistant pretends not to see you listening, which is his usual strategy for surviving. The stranger introduces himself as Dr. Hartwell, a physician who studied in Europe and has been moving with militia camps, advising where he can. He carries himself differently than Fitch. Less swagger, more caution. His hands are clean, his nails trimmed. That alone feels almost scandalous. Hartwell talks about new ideas floating around in medical circles. He doesn't say germs, not exactly, but he hints at invisible causes. He speaks of contagion not as bad air, but as something that passes from person to person through contact. Fitch rolls his eyes. So you're saying the sickness rides on hands like a flea? Hartwell nods. Perhaps, or on cloth, or on instruments. Fitch's face tightens. He glances toward his wall of tools, suddenly seeing them not as symbols of skill, but as possible carriers of death. You can tell he hates that thought, because it threatens the whole foundation of his practice. It also feels uncomfortably, like it might be true, mainstream fact, in the 18th century. European medicine began inching toward more systematic observation and early epidemiological thinking, with some physicians emphasizing record-keeping, outcomes, and contagion practices, even though the germ theory of disease wasn't established until the 19th century. Hartwell points to a bowl on the table. If you rinse instruments in wine or boiling water between patients, he says, you may see fewer wound fevers. Fitch scoffs reflexively, then pauses. He scratches his jaw. Boiling water, he mutters, as if the phrase tastes strange, like making tea. Hartwell smiles slightly. Yes, like making tea. Only you're making survival. They shift to another topic. Statistics. Hartwell describes how in some European hospitals, physicians track how many men die after certain procedures, how many recover, how different treatments compare. It's not perfect. The records are messy. But it's an attempt to replace tradition with evidence. Fitch leans back, arms crossed. So we become clerks, he says, writing numbers while men scream. Hartwell's voice stays calm. Or we keep doing what we've always done because it feels right, even when it's wrong. The room goes quiet. Even the clock seems to tick louder. Historians still argue whether this shift toward evidence-based practice emerged more from enlightened philosophy or from the brutal necessity of war and crowded cities. Watching Fitch here, you suspect it's both. New ideas arrive, but it's suffering that forces them to take root. Later that day, Fitch tries one of Hartwell's suggestions without admitting he's trying it. A man comes in with a deep cut on his hand. Instead of immediately wrapping it with whatever cloth is nearest, Fitch boils water. You watch him pour it into a basin and let his tools sit in it a moment, face tense like he's doing something indecent. He rinses the wound with warm water, then wine. He uses cleaner cloth than usual. The assistant looks startled, like he's watching a man put on a new personality. The man leaves with his hand bandaged and instructions to keep it clean. Fitch watches him go, then mutters to himself. We'll see. A few days later, another wounded man returns, and the cut is less angry than expected, less swollen, less foul-smelling. The man flexes his fingers and smiles. Feels better, he says. Fitch nods once, sharply, as if acknowledging this might require him to change his mind, which is apparently the hardest procedure he's ever performed. You start noticing more small shifts. Fitch tells his assistant to wash cloth more often. He becomes picky about which rags touch which wounds. He still bleeds people. Yes, because he can't let go of that habit entirely. But now he does it with less enthusiasm, as if the thrill has been replaced with a question. He also starts talking differently. Less about humors, more about inflammation. Less about wandering organs, more about nerves. It's subtle, but it's there. Language shifting as the old explanations begin to crack. One evening, you find Fitch and Hartswell sitting by candlelight, comparing notes. Fitch has a ledger open, and he's actually writing numbers. His handwriting looks like it's been dragged through mud. But he's doing it. Hartwell points to a line. "That's 3 men with fever after amputation this month," he says. Where the saw's rinsed, Fitch's mouth tightens. "Not every time." Hartwell's gaze stays steady. "Then you have an experiment," he says. Fitch looks up sharply. "Don't call it that," he snaps, then sighs. "But maybe you realize something odd. Fitch, who sells miracle drops and loves a crowd, is also capable of being humbled by evidence. He's stubborn, sure, but he's not entirely locked. War has shaken him, death has shaken him, and now a man with cleaner hands and a calmer voice is shaking him again. Outside, the town still carries herbs in pockets and consults almanacs. People still blame bad air and sin. But in Fitch's little office, something new is knocking. Not a dramatic revolution, just a faint tapping, like a careful visitor at the door. Observation, patterns, cleanliness, counting. It's not glamorous. It won't make a good market speech. But it might keep a man from dying of wound fever after a saw that went from one body to another like a cursed instrument. Before you leave, you catch Fitch staring at his hands. He flexes his fingers slowly, as if they're tools that might be upgraded. "You think it's true?" he asks you, surprisingly quiet. "That sickness rides on us?" You hesitate, then nod. "It might." He exhales through his nose, almost a laugh. "Imagine that," he mutters. "All this time, blaming the air, and it's been my own damned fingers. It's one of the rare moments where you see him without his armor. You step outside into crisp evening air, and the town feels the same, but also not. Because now you've seen the beginning of a shift, the first thin crack in old certainty. The kind of crack that, over decades, becomes a door. Science doesn't arrive like a hero bursting into the room. It arrives like Hartwell, with a ledger and a quiet insistence that results matter more than tradition. Fitch starts washing his hands more, which in this town is basically the medical equivalent of discovering fire. You notice it immediately. He doesn't announce it. He doesn't sermonize. He just does it, stiffly. Like a man learning a new dance he swore he'd never need. That change ripples outward in small ways. The assistant scrubs basins. Cloth gets boiled. The vinegar rags become less of a mystical air purifier and more of a practical disinfecting habit, even if no one uses that word yet. It's not a revolution. It's a tweak. And then Fitch drops the next surprise. He's taking you to a lecture. You almost laugh out loud. Fitch, who used to boast about 6 months in Boston like it was a war medal, now wants to attend a lecture like a scholar. But he's serious. He's grumpy about it, which is how you know it's serious. "Medical men are gathering," he says. "A demonstration, anatomy." Your stomach tightens. You already know what anatomy means in a world without donated bodies and polite consent forms. Still, you follow. The medical school is not a grand building with marble steps. It's a rented room above a shop in a larger town a day's ride away, lit by windows and smoky oil lamps. A handful of men stand around a table, coats off, sleeves rolled, faces eager in a way that makes you instinctively check for exits. They're all male. That's the first thing you feel, the heavy certainty of it. Women are everywhere in care, but rarely in formal spaces. Midwives and herbalists keep bodies alive in kitchens and bedrooms, while men gather in rooms like this to claim the title of knowledge. On the table is a body, a cadaver, pale and stiff, wrapped loosely in cloth. The room smells of spirits and something sweet-sour that you recognize from the field hospital. Death trying to become chemistry. A man at the front introduces himself as Professor Wainwright. He speaks with the tone of someone who enjoys being listened to. He has clean cuffs, a tidy wig, and the smug calm of a man who believes he's standing on the correct side of history. He begins by talking about the structure of the human form. He points at the torso, tracing where organs sit, where vessels run. The men lean in, hungry for certainty. Mainstream fact: colonial medical education in America was limited, often based on apprenticeships, and formal anatomy instruction was rare and controversial. Dissections did occur, especially in larger cities and among early medical institutions, but acquiring bodies was ethically fraught and often involved grave robbery or the bodies of marginalized people. You try not to stare at the body's face, but your eyes keep landing there anyway. The mouth is slightly open, as if mid-question. It's hard not to imagine the person who once spoke, laughed, ate, now reduced to a teaching tool. Professor Wainwright lifts a scalpel and begins cutting. The sound is quiet, almost delicate, which makes it worse. He peels back skin, exposes muscle. He names each part in Latin as if the language itself makes it less human. Fitch watches with an intensity you haven't seen since the field hospital. He's not gloating, he's learning. And that's unsettling, because learning here is literal. Around you, the other men murmur, taking notes. One points out a nerve. Another argues about whether a certain structure connects where Wainwright claims they're not cruel, exactly. They're absorbed. The body is an object to them now. A map. Then the debate starts. Because of course it does. One man insists the liver is the true seat of passion. Another argues it's the heart. Wainwright scoffs and says the brain governs all. Someone brings up animal spirits moving through nerves. Another dismisses it as outdated. Historians still argue how quickly old humor theory gave way to anatomical and physiological thinking, and whether practitioners truly abandoned humors or just layered new ideas on top of the old. Listening to these men, you can hear the overlap. Latin anatomy on top of superstition. Science knocking while tradition refuses to leave. At some point, Wainwright mentions women, not as participants. As subjects, he talks about the uterus in clipped, confident terms, repeating the old idea that female bodies are governed by reproduction, that female nerves are delicate, that women are prone to hysteria and moral weakness. He says it like fact, and the room nods like trained birds. You think of Mercy Talbot. You think of her bitter little smile about her wandering wombs. You feel heat rise in your chest. A man near you whispers, "Women's complaints are mostly imagination." Fitch doesn't respond, but you see his jaw tighten slightly. Is it disagreement or just discomfort? Hard to tell. Fitch's mind is changing in some ways, but bias is a deeper habit than hand-washing. In a corner, you notice a young man scribbling furiously. He looks earnest, almost humble. He asks Wainwright about outcomes, about whether certain procedures increase survival. Wainwright waves him off. "We deal in form, not numbers," he says dismissively. The young man's face falls. You think of Hartwell's ledger and his calm insistence. The battle isn't just between old and new. It's also between ego and evidence. And this room is thick with ego. After the demonstration, the men gather in small groups, talking loudly, praising Wainwright, comparing apprenticeships and war stories. Fitch is quieter than usual. He stares at his hands again, as if seeing them differently after watching the inside of a body laid bare. Outside, the air is colder and cleaner, and you breathe it greedily on the ride back. Fitch finally speaks. "They know things," he says, grudging. "They think they know things," you reply. Unable to help yourself, Fitch snorts. "Same difference sometimes." You walk beside his horse for a stretch. "Where did the body come from?" you ask. Fitch's eyes flick away. "Don't ask that. That tells you everything. Bodies don't just appear on tables. In this era, cadavers often come from the poor, the imprisoned, the unclaimed, or the stolen. Dissection is a privilege built on someone else's powerlessness. It's a grim truth beneath the polished Latin. You think of the midwives and herbalists again, of women who know bodies through living touch and years of observation, but are barred from rooms like this. You think of the irony, men cutting open the dead to claim authority, while women keep the living alive and still get called superstitious. Back in town, Fitch returns to his office and immediately starts rearranging his books. He pulls out his old anatomy sketch, the lumpy one, and stares at it with disdain. He begins a new drawing, more careful, not perfect, but closer. You watch from the doorway, feeling the strange tension of this moment. Medicine is shifting, education is forming, but it's forming with exclusions baked in. Women pushed out, bodies taken, egos loud, and yet something is still changing. Fitch is listening, at least sometimes. Hartwell is counting. A young man is asking questions. The midwives are still working, still saving people quietly. You go home with your mind buzzing, thinking about how progress is rarely clean. It's messy, compromised, stained with the flaws of the people who carry it forward. And in the dark, you remember the body on the table, the stillness, the mouth slightly open, as if it wanted to say, "If you're going to learn from me, at least learn well." For a brief moment, you let yourself believe the town can handle anything now. Smallpox fear has taught people caution. War has taught Fitch speed. Hartwell's ledger has taught him humility, at least in small doses. You've watched the system bend, just a little, towards something resembling sense. Then summer arrives, and with it a different kind of dread. It starts with heat that sits on the town like a heavy hand. The air goes thick. The river smells wrong. Flies multiply with the enthusiasm of a bad idea. People sleep poorly. Tempers flare, and somewhere down the coast, in a port city with crowded docks and shallow wells, the word begins to travel again. Yellow fever. At first, it's just a whisper carried by traders. A sailor staggering off a boat, eyes glassy, a sudden rash, vomiting that looks like dark coffee grounds. Then the deaths come fast enough to make even the most stubborn men stop pretending it's just summer sickness. You don't see yellow fever in your town immediately, but you see the reaction before you see the disease, and the reaction is its own epidemic. Fitch gets a letter, reads it once, then reads it again, slower, as if hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something kinder. He folds it, sticks it in his pocket, and begins giving advice without being asked. "Keep your doors shut at dusk," he says. "Burn vinegar. Don't linger near stagnant water. Miasma. Again, bad air. Rotting air. That's what people believe brings yellow fever. They don't know about mosquitoes yet. Not in the way future generations will. They see swamps and heat and death, and they blame the smell. Mainstream fact. Yellow fever epidemics struck American port cities in the late 18th century, causing mass panic, flight, and high mortality. People often blamed miasmas and poor air. The mosquito vector wasn't confirmed until much later. The town council meets. You hear the arguments through open windows as you pass the meeting house. One man wants to close the roads. Another wants to keep trade flowing because we can't starve for fear. The minister calls it judgment. A shopkeeper calls it bad luck. Someone else calls it the fault of foreigners, because blaming strangers is a hobby people never seem to tire of. Historians still argue whether flight during epidemics was a rational survival tactic or whether it worsened spread by carrying disease outward. In your town, nobody has the luxury of debating it academically. People are already packing. The first to leave are the wealthy. They do it quietly at first. A wagon loaded at dawn, a family gone by noon. Doors locked, shutters drawn. Their houses sit empty, neat, like they're holding their breath until danger passes. Then the merchants begin to go, because their friends in the port city send terrifying letters. Leave, the letters say, in 100 different tones. It's in the streets. The bells don't stop. The dead are carted at night, soon. The town is full of movement. Wagons creak, horses stamp. People carry bundles and baskets, trying to pack their lives into manageable piles. You watch a family you recognize, the ones with the cleanest coats, climb into a wagon with a trunk strapped behind. Their youngest child cries because she doesn't understand why they're fleeing in the heat. The mother shushes her sharply, panic leaking out as impatience. A different family, poor, stands at the edge of the road with nothing but a sack. They don't leave. They can't. No horses, no place to go, no money to pay for lodging elsewhere. They just watch the rich roll away, dust rising behind them like a curtain. This is where you learn the cruel truth of epidemics. Disease hits everyone, but escape is purchased. Fitch doesn't leave. He could, probably. He has a horse, a reputation, a pouch of coins, but he stays, partly from duty, partly because he knows the town needs him, and partly because, deep down, he might be too proud to run. He sets up what he calls precautions. He tells people to avoid crowds, to boil water, to keep bedding clean. He's still half in miasma thinking, but his habits are shifting toward practical hygiene. He asks the assistant to scrub floors with vinegar. He opens windows when he can, then closes them at dusk when the mosquitoes come out. Not because he knows they're the problem, but because the air feels worse then. Accidentally, he may be doing the right thing for the wrong reason. The first actual case arrives, like a spark landing on dry grass. A man staggers into town from the coast, face waxy, eyes yellowed. His wife follows, crying. He's burning, she says. He can't keep water down. Fitch takes one look and orders them isolated in a shed behind his house. The assistant hesitates. If it's yellow fever, it's already late. Fitch snaps. You help carry blankets. You keep your distance, fear tightening your throat. The man's skin is hot. His eyes are glassy. He mutters nonsense. Then he vomits, dark and thick, and the smell turns your stomach. Fitch wipes his brow and looks at you sharply. Don't touch your face, he orders. Wash your hands. If you feel fever, you tell me. His voice has a new edge. Not bravado, not performance, pure urgency. Over the next days, more people leave. The road's thin, the market stalls empty. The tavern closes. The town feels like it's shrinking inward, pulling its lungs tight. And still, not everyone goes. The poor remain. The elderly. The ones with farms they can't abandon. The ones with sick relatives who can't travel. The ones who are stubborn or faithful or simply trapped. You walk through quieter streets and notice which houses are shuttered and which are not. The empty ones look rich. The occupied ones look tired. You pass the meeting house and think about Thomas in the cellar again, and you wonder what happens to him if the men who control the keys decide fleeing matters more than remembering the chained man beneath their feet. You also see small acts of courage, because courage is often quieter than panic. A woman brings broth to Fitch's assistant, leaving it on the step and backing away. A boy carries water from the well for an older neighbor. Someone nails a note to the post by the road. If you leave, leave word. If you stay, stay kind. The yellow fever scare becomes a pressure that reshapes the town's social map. Who has means? Who has obligation? Who has nowhere to go? The disease itself is terrifying. Yes, but the way it reveals inequality feels like a second sickness. One evening, the sun sets in a hazy red, and the air is thick with summer insects. You stand outside your door and hear wagons creaking in the distance, heading away. Somewhere a dog barks and then goes silent. You feel the town holding its breath again, like it did with smallpox, but this time the fear is sharper, because everyone has heard the coastal stories. Everyone knows yellow fever can burn through a place like fire through dry grass. And you can't help thinking, with a cold twist in your stomach, that the real test isn't just whether the town can survive the fever, it's whether the town can survive what fear makes people do. The town feels like a house after a party where something went wrong. Too quiet. Too many half-finished tasks. Too many doors closed. The yellow fever scare has people moving like they're underwater. Slow and tense, listening for any hint of sickness in the air. And Fitch, for once, stops talking. Not completely, but enough that you notice. He doesn't brag. He doesn't hawk bottles. He doesn't mock moon cures out loud. He watches. He washes his hands. He keeps people at distances that would have felt rude a year ago. He asks questions with a new seriousness. He writes more. Then, one evening, you see him do something you've never seen him do. You see him look afraid. It happens when you bring him a bundle of boiled cloth and find him in the back room, kneeling by his cabinet. He's pulling out bottles, jars, packets, and setting them on the floor like he's sorting weapons before a siege. His face is pinched. His eyes are red, not from rum, but from exhaustion. He glances at you, then away. Close the door, he says. You do. The click of the latch sounds louder than it should. Fitch stands slowly and reaches behind a loose board in the wall. You watch his fingers find a hidden gap. He pulls out a thin book wrapped in oilcloth. A journal. He holds it a moment like it weighs more than paper. Then he sets it on the table and unwraps it with careful hands. The assistant isn't here. The room is just you, Fitch, and the soft hiss of the hearth. You've been sniffing around, he says, not accusing, more resigned. You've watched too much, asked too little. That's the dangerous kind. You don't answer. You just look at the journal. He opens it, and you see tight handwriting. Lines packed close as if space was precious, not the sloppy notes he makes for patients. This is deliberate. Private. This is not for the town, Fitch says quietly. If they knew, they'd drag me by my ankles and call it justice. Your throat tightens. What is it? Fitch taps the page. The truth, he says, then lets out a humorless breath. Or my version of it. He flips back a few pages and begins reading. Not out loud like a performance, but in a low voice like confession. Names, dates, outcomes. February. He reads. Treated Mrs. H. for fever. Bled twice. She worsened. Died on the third day. He turns the page. March, he reads. Administered calomel to Mr. D. Purged violently. Improved briefly. Died of weakness. He pauses. Jaw clenched. He looks at you as if daring you to blame him. The worst part is you don't need to. He's already doing it. Fitch flips again. April, he murmurs. Amputated Thomas K.'s foot. Wound fever. He begged for water. Died after 8 days. The room feels colder. The words are so plain, so stripped of excuses. No humors, no moon phases, no talk of providence, just cause, attempt, result, failure. You realize Fitch has been keeping score all along. Even before Hartwell showed him the idea, he just kept it hidden. Because a doctor's authority here depends on the illusion that he knows what he's doing. He turns to another page and your stomach drops when you recognize a name. Mercy Talbot, June. Fitch reads, voice tightening. Mercy T. Fits of sadness and trembling. Diagnosed hysteria. Laudanum given. Husband reports improvement. Patient's eyes empty. I have made her quiet. Not well. Fitch stops reading. The silence is thick. You swallow. Why write it down? Fitch stares at the paper like it's accusing him. Because I can't carry it all in my head, he says. Because some nights I wake and hear screams I never screamed. Because they come to me with their hopes, and I hand them knives and poison and call it healing. His voice cracks slightly on that last word. He clears his throat hard, as if offended by his own humanity. Quirky. Fringe tidbit slips out as he keeps flipping. Tucked between pages is a pressed leaf bundle, tied with twine. Not his usual dried powders. Something arranged carefully, almost respectfully. You keep herbs, you ask. Surprised, Fitch's mouth tightens. The herb woman gave me that, he mutters. Said it calms the stomach. I mocked her, then I tried it. It worked. He looks almost embarrassed admitting it. Like admitting a woman helped him is a bigger sin than mercury. He flips further. July. He reads. Inoculation performed on 4 families. 3 mild, 1 severe. Child lived. Town threatens me anyway. He taps the ink with a finger. They wanted miracles, he says. I offered them odds. They hate odds. He turns another page and your skin prickles again. There's a list of names you don't recognize at first. But then you realize what it is. Payments, not just fees. Notes like, owed by J.W. Accepted work in lieu. Debt carried to tavern. Bottle sale to cover cards. There it is. The other half of Fitch's life. The hustle, the gambling, the way medicine and money twist together. He reads one line aloud and winces. Sold tonic to Mrs. P. Though I doubt it helps. Needed coin. Shame. You feel a wave of anger, then another wave behind it. Pity. He's not a monster. He's a man trapped inside a role that demands certainty, in a world that offers none. Historians still argue whether colonial practitioners were primarily healers, hamstrung by limited science, or opportunists using authority for profit. Fitch, sitting here, is both. Not neatly, not comfortably. Both, tangled. He closes the journal and rubs his forehead. You see, he says, that's what happens behind the curtain. You glance at his tools on the wall. They look different now. Less like instruments of expertise and more like evidence. Each one has a history. Each one has a body attached to it. Whether it lived or didn't. What do you want me to do with this? You ask. Voice low. Fitch laughs softly, bitter. Nothing, he says. That's the point. You can't fix it. I can't fix it. Not fully. I can only try to do less harm than yesterday. He looks at you, eyes tired. Hartwell talks about numbers, clean hands, outcomes. Fine, I'll do it. I'll count. I'll boil. I'll listen more. But the town will still blame me when death comes, because death always comes. You think of Thomas in the cellar, of Mercy Talbot's empty eyes, of the amputations in the tent, of children forced to swallow sulfur molasses, of people fleeing yellow fever because they can afford to be afraid in motion. You realize Fitch's journal isn't just his secret. It's the town's secret too. The truth that medicine here is messy, partial, sometimes harmful, always human, before you leave. Fitch slides the journal back into its oilcloth. His hands linger on it like he's saying goodbye to a confession. "Don't speak of it," he says. You nod. You won't. Not because you fear him, but because you understand what that book is. It's the only place Fitch allows himself to admit that he's not a wizard. He's a man guessing in the dark, trying to keep others alive while the world changes around him. You step outside into the evening air and find the sky washed in late sunlight. The street is quiet. A few wagons still roll away in the distance. Somewhere, a child laughs, thin but real. You walk home with the weight of Fitch's words in your chest. Do less harm than yesterday. It's not heroic. It's not a miracle. But in this century, it might be the most honest oath anyone can take. The yellow fever scare doesn't explode in your town the way people feared. Not like the coastal horror stories with bells tolling until the rope phrase. There are a few cases, a few fevers that burn hot and fast, a few funerals done quietly at dawn. Then, as the season shifts and the nights cool, the worst of it slips away like a predator losing interest. The town exhales, slow and shaky, and pretends it was all a bad dream. People drift back. Wagons return with dusty wheels. Shutters open. The market stalls fill again. The tavern reopens and immediately smells like spilled ale and bad decisions, which is oddly comforting in a "the world is still itself" kind of way. Fitch keeps working through it all, but you notice he's different now. Not dramatically transformed into a saint. Not suddenly free of ego or bad habits, but altered at the edges. He washes more. He boils more. He writes more. He sells fewer miracle bottles, though you still catch one or two tucked behind his cabinet, like guilty little secrets that refuse to leave. And one morning, you find yourself standing in his doorway again, looking at the waiting room as if it's a scene you've watched 100 times but never truly understood until now. The creaky bench is the same. The clock ticks. The cat with the half-ear still rules the floorboards like a small, judgmental king. The air still carries faint notes of vinegar, herbs, and old blood. But your eyes have changed. You see the room as an engine of survival. Flawed, loud, sometimes cruel, sometimes kind, always moving. A mother sits with a toddler on her lap, rocking gently. A man with a bandaged hand stares at the wall. An older woman holds a jar of dried herbs like it's both medicine and prayer. Someone coughs, and the whole room flinches out of habit, then relaxes again. People have learned to live with fear the way they live with winter. You don't defeat it, you manage it. Fitch steps out from the back, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. Clean, actually clean. He catches your eye and jerks his chin toward a corner shelf. "You see that?" he asks. On the shelf sits a small tray with neatly folded cloths, a basin, and a kettle, a crude little hygiene station. There's even a bar of lye soap, harsh and ugly, but present. "Hartwell's idea," he mutters, as if blaming someone else makes it easier. "It's good," you say. Fitch grunts, but there's a hint of satisfaction in it. "It's less stupid," he allows. Then he moves to the cabinet and opens it. Inside are jars and bottles, labeled more carefully than before. Bark, clove, willow, ginger. A few things you recognize from the herbalist's cabin. He notices you noticing. "I don't advertise those," he says quickly, like a teenager caught with something embarrassing. People don't trust what they can't fear. You almost smile. They trust what hurts. "Exactly," Fitch says, and for once his sarcasm sounds tired, not smug. Mainstream fact. The late 1700s and early 1800s saw gradual shifts in American medicine toward more organized training, hospitals, and professional standards, even though many older practices persisted. The era you've walked through is one where folk remedies, humoral theory, and emerging scientific observation coexist, often in the same room. Historians still argue how to measure progress in this period, because some changes were real and life-saving, while others were mostly institutional power consolidating around male physicians. You've seen both. You've seen how counting outcomes and boiling tools can save lives. You've also seen women's knowledge dismissed, bodies taken without consent, suffering labeled hysteria instead of heard. And now, standing here, you feel how all those threads knot together in this one strange, chaotic place. Fitch steps aside as the next patient is called in. You watch him work. He asks more questions now. He listens longer. When he reaches for a tool, he rinses it first. Not always, but more often. When he prescribes a tonic, he's less theatrical about it. Still blunt, still Fitch, but less eager to sell a miracle. It isn't redemption, it's adjustment. It's a man learning to be slightly better in a world that rewards certainty more than honesty. You drift around the office like a ghost of your own curiosity. You glance at the saw hanging on the wall, teeth dulled by use. You remember the field hospital tent, the rasp of bone, the smell of cautery. You glance at the bleeding bowl, polished and waiting. You remember the leeches in their jar, smug and wriggling. You remember the mercury spoon, silver and treacherous. You also remember the herbalist's cabin, warm and quiet, the smell of crushed leaves. You remember the midwife's steady hands. You remember Mercy Talbot's small, bitter joke about her wandering womb. You remember Thomas chained in the cellar, listening to hymns above his head like they were meant for someone else. All of it is medicine here. The official and unofficial, the wise and the foolish, the compassionate and the controlling. It all happened at the doctor's, and it wasn't one thing. It was a whole world in miniature. Later, you step outside and walk down the street toward the apothecary. It's a narrow little shop with shelves of jars behind glass. Dried flowers, powders, resins, tinctures. The apothecary is not a doctor, not exactly. More a pharmacist, a compounder, a merchant of remedies. He sells what people ask for. He sells what people believe in. Inside, you watch a man buy a small packet of bark for fever. A woman buys clove oil for tooth pain. A farmer buys something called worm powder for his child. The apothecary measures everything carefully, tongue sticking out in concentration. You realize how much of American medicine is being built not in grand halls, but in places like this. Small shops, cramped offices, kitchens, barns, tents. The future isn't arriving with trumpets. It's arriving with kettles and ledgers and women whispering recipes and doctors learning, grudgingly, to wash their hands. You step back outside and breathe in cool air. The season is turning. The leaves are beginning to shift. Smoke rises from chimneys again, steady and domestic. And now comes the slow part. The part where you stop chasing the next crisis and just let the world settle around you. You walk past the meeting house and pause, your eyes lingering on the ground near the hidden door. You don't open it today. You don't have the power to change what's inside, but you hold Thomas in your mind for a moment, like a candle held in cupped hands, a quiet promise not to forget. You continue down the road, and the town feels softer, not because it is kinder, but because your own body is no longer thrumming with adrenaline. You're tired, not just sleepy tired, but soul tired, the kind you get from looking too closely at how humans try to survive. You think about Fitch's journal, hidden behind that loose board, the honest tally of failures and small successes. The confession that medicine here is not magic, just effort. You think about how the future will judge this century. People will laugh at leeches and mercury. They'll shudder at amputations without anesthesia. They'll scoff at wandering wombs and moon cures, but they might miss the deeper truth if they only laugh. Because what really happened at the doctor's in 1700s America is that people showed up anyway, with fear, with pain, with hope in their palms like a fragile egg. They showed up because the alternative was to face sickness alone in the dark. And sometimes, even with all the wrong tools and wrong theories, that showing up mattered. Now your steps slow, your breath steadies. The night air cools your face. You let your shoulders drop. You let the town sounds fade into something gentle, a distant dog bark, the soft creak of a cart, the hush of wind through trees. You're safe for the moment. You're home. You've traveled through blood and superstition and early science and quiet cruelty, and you've come out the other side still breathing, so you let your eyelids grow heavy. You imagine the office empty now, tools hanging still, the kettle cooling. You imagine Fitch finally sitting down, rubbing his eyes, closing his ledger. You imagine the herbalist tying up her bundles for winter, humming. You imagine the midwife washing her hands, steady and tired. You imagine the town settling into sleep like a blanket drawn up to the chin. The world fades to softer edges. You don't need to solve it tonight. You don't need to fix a century. You just need to rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.